Good morning, everyone. This is what I've been thinking with Marcus Cage on the What We've Been Thinking with Marcus Cage channel. I am back with some good friends and colleagues. For those of you guys have seen recently, I've had the pleasure of having Dr. Guguletu Hughes out of South Africa on multiple times, and if you guys enjoy that content, then make sure you stay subscribed because we're going to have him back more often. Also, for those who might have seen our older interview, we have Alphabet returning and we have Malick returning. And so it was such a fun and enlightening conversation that we had the last time around. There's always, logistical things that happen. It is life that have kind of delayed it, but I'm so happy that we're having the opportunity to have those two back and have Google Letu back. Also, there are a lot of pressing issues that I've been noticing that have been going on. One of the big issues, of course, is what's going on in Somalia. And for those who don't know, I'm going to allow Malick and Alphabet to kind of go in and really explain it because attention needs to be brought to what's going on. I got to make sure I have my phone so that I can put the link in the chat because anybody who can help with the GoFundMe that's been started, I want you guys to be able to do that. And even if you yourself can't, don't have the means or resources to be able to help fund it, then at least get the word out for somebody who can do that. Sometimes word of the mouth is a very valuable thing that is taken for granted many times. So we want to make sure that we use the power of resource and network. For those who are listening in who are on who prefer to use Rockfin, I am on Rockfin. I am through Periscope going to be on Twitter. So I need to make sure that I hop onto Twitter for a second and share this out. Make sure that it's coming up live also. So I'm going to do that really quickly. I'm going to pin it to the top. I'm going to tag my friends and colleagues all in here. That way that they can be reminded to send it out to their audiences also. And then I'll give a little short intro, while more people kind of tune in and realize that we're live. I know that on the West Coast, for instance, it can be a little trying for those who went out partying last night. They might not realize, oh crap, he's on now. Let me get up. So I'm putting it up now. We are live. For those who are not familiar with my guests, I'm going to give you guys a little short intro of at least how I come across the different guests, so that you guys can be familiar also. I first came across the guests through a space that Alphabet had going. And in that space, Alphabet was going into a lot of different things that were going on the continent of Africa. Let me switch this view. So Alphabet was going into a bunch of things, and she had a very diverse crowd and audience, and it was going into many different, tragic things which were going on in the continent of Africa, and it was also talking about a lot of colonization and things that are still plaguing the country. A continent to this very day. I'm talking various countries. So I wanted to have her on to get her input on various different things that were going on. Also, the fact that she's based in the UK, to be able to get a perspective of what's going on, especially at that time, I believe Brexit was still, it was still kind of the aftermath of Brexit, and we were trying to figure out some of those things. And then she introduced me to Malick, which Malick runs the channel Afro Propaganda on YouTube. You guys can find it there. I'm pretty sure on there oh yeah, that's right. His Instagram is also Afro Propaganda on there, where you can get his Instagram. So make sure you guys check that out. He does some very, very good videos going into history and explaining some things. And for those who are not familiar with Dr. Guguletu Hughes, he's based out of South Africa. He's very knowledgeable on the history of not only South Africa, but the whole entire continent, and about some of the intersectionality of the different foreign policy ventures, whether they're dealing with Russia, China, the US, the UK, and all of those things. So I got three very, very knowledgeable people here. If you guys are on I think I might have put it into the Rockfin and onto the YouTube, their information to be able to go in there. I'm going to be making sure to put the GoFundMe in the chat. So that said, hopefully everybody is in here. We got more people in here settled. I see Nantu says good evening in South Africa. I see my boy Cy Lawson is in here. I see Uncle Warren in here. Glad to see you. And for those who are over on Rockfin, let me give you guys a hello for anybody that's hopped into the chat. Once you guys hop in there, just give a hello. Let us know you're there. And any questions which you have for our guests, please, let the guests know. So, we will start off, ladies first. And Alphabet, how are we doing today?
Very well, brother. Thank you. Thank you for inviting us. Thank you for doing the important work that you do on a regular basis. And I hope everything's well with you. And yeah, I'm very well. I'm happy to be here. I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, so happy to be here. My brother Malick, how are we doing, sir?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Always a great conversation with you. So yeah, like with Alphabet, thank you very much for having us on here. And I look forward to discussing great things.
Good, good, good. And Google Letu, how are we doing, sir? How are we doing? Now, he might have a little bit of problems there with audio, but we will get Google Letu in when he's good to go, or just click in whenever you're in. Let me know, sir. See forward movement. No, DJ Elvis is muted. Oh goodness. If he's muted, I didn't do it. So moderators, you guys can let him get in, ask him questions, as long as he's not being, rude or being a pest or spamming. So that's perfectly fine. I guess I'll toss this over to Malick and Alphabet, because a lot of times that they work really good in tandem explaining this information out. So I first want to start off with what's going on in Somalia. A lot for the people who don't know what's going on, because it is pressing that we know what's going on over there.
Yeah. I mean, there's a political crisis right now, and a famine that is due to set in. But I think I'll let Alphabet talk about the situation right now, and then perhaps afterwards I can go into like the history behind it that has led to today's situation. Does that sound okay, Alphabet?
Yeah, that sounds perfect. So there's two important issues going on in Somalia right now, rather facing the Somali people in Somalia right now. And one of them being obviously the famine and the droughts that are going on, and that's just that's something that's like completely out of their personal control, because that's just due to climate change and global warming, which we all know. I believe Africa as a whole continent is the producers of like 4% of the CO2 emissions and things like that, and carbon footprint. So that's the largest continent in the world that, as a collective of 54 countries, is only damaging the earth at 4% of the time. That means us in the imperial core are causing them to die. And the sad truth of it is, because they live in Somalia and things like that, and just a lot of countries in the global majority, especially in Africa, are going to be the ones that are first impacted by global warming, climate change, which are all things that are due to Western lifestyles. That's what's caused it. Well, to this level and to this degree, at the very least. So with that said, because they live in very dry sort of desert type land. What's happening there is they're going through seasons of time when there's just no rain, no water, no anything. So that can be for like 6 months. They can go without rain at some point, which is critical for them because they're much more simpler in terms of their lifestyle and their living and
Huh.
things like that. So they need the rain, you
Alphabet.
know?
Sorry to interrupt you, but I really didn't know. I guess I'm like, let's not just go past that really quick. You said the continent is only responsible for about 4% of like these negative emissions, which are affecting, the whole entire, the world. I mean, that's kind of mind-boggling to think that it's so much of it's so small of a footprint that it's being left, but you know it's the impact that's being put on it by mostly the Western powers. um how that's affecting it, I don't know. I just thought that was something that's a little mind-boggling to think about, because I remember somebody saying that a lot of climate change is actually has a degree of racism to it. And so I just wanted to stop and kind of point that out.
No, you're right. It does. It does. And it's like one of the saddest facts. It's not like something that they can even control. It's not something that they can try to minimize. It's not anything that they are in control of at all. It's climate change essentially is going to affect the hotter climates and stuff. And we all know that Africa is definitely going to fall into that. And the countries with most extreme weathers in general are going to be most affected. And it's a sad fact that in the end of the day, everything I used to be, as a younger person, I used to be of the impression like, oh, well, it's not our problem, but it sadly is. Their footprints has to become our problem. We have to clean up after them somehow, some way, at least while we're here in the imperial core, because in the end of the day, it's our lives that will be lost due to their lives of luxury and overspending, over consuming, overproducing. All of these things, they have an impact, but sadly, it's not an impact on the people that are doing these things. It's the most people that are going to be impacted are the people who are doing the bare minimum of the input for that. So it's really sad. It's a really, really sad statistic when you look at it, especially since it's, like I say, it's like the biggest continent on the world, really. It's one of them anyway. So it's just a sad thing to think about. So the sadder part about it is, even if these people wanted to just pull themselves up by the bootstraps in regards to that, there's not much that they could do. It's completely out of their hand. Um, so yeah, with that said, when these long periods of droughts occur, it's often not just the lack of water; it's also the fact that their animals, their livestock, are being killed off due to um, the lack of water, the lack of just hydration in general. And it's also like the children that have been left behind, like the children who are orphaned or don't have families. The poorest of the poor are the ones that are going to be impacted, even even in Somalia, right? There's going to be middle class and upper class people that are going to be fine. They'll be able to buy their way out of this. But for the majority of the people there, they're going to just have to suffer and just deal with that. So it's very important that we at least try to help in whichever way we can in that. And also that just means watching our carbon footprint here in the imperial core, and also just making sure that we can give them whatever we can, because in the end of the day, whether we choose to be here or not, which none of us do really, Black people were displaced, be it through slavery or colonialism or wars and stuff like that. So um, it's not something that we have chosen to be, in terms of being here in the imperial core, but it's something that we have to take accountability for, sadly, in terms of our own personal carbon footprint and how we can help. Because in the end of the day, when we're watching our TVs and we're doing all of these things and we're driving on nice cars and all of these things, that's just killing our people back home quickly. And it's easy for these people not to take it as a pressing concern because they get all the benefits from climate change without having to really see any of the negative impacts personally on their personal lives. So yeah, I would just implore that everybody just look into that and see what we can do, see what we can't do, see how you can change your personal lifestyle to help slow down the footprint that we're causing on them. And then the second issue, moving on from that, is the political issue right now. And that political issue it's very simple. It's just another it's sadly just another case of America forcing its way in. So the brief story of that is Somalia had a previous president that was actually elected by the people. Under his reign, there was some oil that was found in Somalia, and it's currently being talked about as like some of the largest untapped oil, potential oil rigs and stuff like that. And obviously, as soon as you hear oil, you know America's like right there. So America, in his own presidency, there was people in his cabinet and his ministry that were, I would say, politically compromised anyway, at the very least. And they tried to broker a deal with America for that oil. However, upon his discovery of that, he has the ultimate say in the end of the day as a president. So he he sort of his name is, by the way, Faramajo, and President Faramajo basically refused the deal. He said it's not a good deal. He doesn't understand why Americans need to be involved in African oil, in African soil, and it's not going to be beneficial for the African people in the long run. So for him, that was just a no-go. It was not something that he wanted to deal with. So that deal was shut down, and this was like back in, I think it was February, when he shut that deal down completely. And then I would say by like May, he was ousted essentially, with the help of the Americans, the American government. What they did is they sort of staged a coup in which only 327 elite and parliament members were allowed to vote in Somalia, and that was enough to displace him as president and put in the puppet Hassan Sheikh, um, which is the current Somali president, who's not just signing deals now with America, like literally within the first 10 hours of the fraud election, the people weren't allowed to vote. There's like 17 million people in Somalia, only 327 people were allowed to vote. That lets you know in itself that this was not a democratic election. This was not anything else but just another American staged coup. Um, and it happened quite drastically. It didn't happen like, it wasn't a long running election. It was just like we're having an election soon, 327 people are voting, the other 17 million can just like go to hell essentially. And the people were obviously very displeased by that. The people stand behind Faramajo because they too don't want American intervention. The last time we had American intervention, it was when they were uh, there for Black Hawk Down and all that stuff. So yeah, it's not something that we welcome as a people. We didn't welcome them then. We sent them home then, and ideally that's going to be creating more hostile tensions in Somalia now when those American soldiers are deployed there. Um, According to America, they're deploying those soldiers there to help fight terrorism, but these are non-combative soldiers that are being sent there. So it's like, how are you sending non-combative terrorists? Yeah, they are. To me, American soldiers are terrorists, but yeah, you're sending non-combative soldiers to fight terrorism. That doesn't make any sense. So yeah, the whole thing is just more so they're going over there to ensure that their deal is secure with the oil. They're going over there to watch over the oil. They're going over there to probably steal some more, like they did in Iraq and everywhere else. And so it's just a terrible place for the people to be in right now. They're facing a famine. They're facing drought. They're facing mass displacement. There's about like just under, I think, 700,000 or just over 700,000 Somalis that have already been displaced due to the climate change and the effects. And so it's an easy time for America to come in and play its political warfare on these people that are already going through a lot of suffering in that sense. But yeah, with that said, the oil deal is now going on. We as a people never recognized Israel as a country. In fact, if you went there, you weren't allowed back. But now they're also starting to recognize Israel as a country. So it's very clear.
Yeah.
What they've done is they've placed their puppet in Somalia, and that's where we're at now, sadly.
Well, and that's something that I noticed a lot of people in the I'll say, I won't say a lot. I'll say some of the people in the West, more people who are part of the diaspora, have brought attention to. I wanted to recognize a couple of people out in the chat. I noticed Yipper has came in. Yipper had a very good comment. Said, I think that's how the West sees it. It's not our problem, even if there's avocado shortage, we will still be in denial. And the U.S. and a lot of the Western powers, or imperial core, as you call them, very, very aptly, will not deal with the ramifications of their actions. My boy Shadow says this is pretty freaking awesome. Never heard of most of these people. Yes, you see next to Alphabet's name down in the bottom corner, that is Alphabet's Twitter handle. Make sure to go and follow Alphabet, because she does have a lot of spaces on Twitter, and that's where you'll find her mostly in the spaces and talking about various different topics. So make sure you do that. The same notice Malick's, and check out his channel. I want to do a sound check also real quick. Google Letu, are you in there, brother?
Yes, thanks, Marcus.
Good.
Sorry for the connectivity issues earlier.
It happens. It is all good. It happens. And if you have any questions that you want to hop in and ask Alphabet or Malick, or that you want to add in some context that you might know, I know that this has been something that I've been talking about the displacing of African leaders, and in Somalia in particular is one of them that I put in, because I remember a lot of the, and Alphabet, please correct me if I get anything wrong at all. I remember many of the policies which the new leader has put into place, like you mentioned about, recognizing Israel, about, basically allowing American troops to come in with no problem. A lot of these were massive reversals and very controversial things, which have happened as a difference of this new leader coming in. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, absolutely, it's correct. Just to add to that as well, his family was recently caught abusing the opposing team's family members and stuff. So it's become very much a political warfare on those that are opposing. And yeah, like as Africans in general, especially the Horn, we've been under this destabilizing attempt for a minute now. But for us, we're not comfortable with any Western intervention or intervening. We believe that we can solve our African problems by ourselves. However, with this guy in charge, it's just opened Somalia wide open to be exploited and used again for resources by America.
Yeah, so when we're often talking about, we know the coups and different things that go around the world and in various countries in the continent of Africa, this is one clear-cut example of what we're talking about on those things. Malick, would you like to get in there and anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think Alphabet did a great job at illustrating the situation right now on the ground. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of Western interests at play here in regards to the regime change. Not only the recognition of Israel as a legitimate state, but also you see US companies entering Somalia. You see Turkish companies entering Somalia as well. Turkey, in fact, built their largest ever military base outside of Turkey. It's now in Somalia, and the reason why they're there, right? It sounds strange. You'd think if Turkey was going to build a military base anywhere, it would be, I don't know, somewhere.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that, so that kind of caught me off guard, Malick.
Yeah, no, it caught me off guard too, because the first question is, what interest does Turkey have in Somalia, right? They're not near each other, right? There's at least a dozen or so countries in between them. It doesn't make any sense until you look at the economic aspect. With that, you see lots of Turkish entrepreneurs entering Somalia. You see Turkish Airways chartering flights directly from Istanbul to Mogadishu to facilitate business links between Turkey and Somalia. And the thing is, when we say business links, when we say trading, when we say entrepreneurs, it sounds very fair, right? Typically, to most people's ears, it sounds fair and it's consensual, and it's you've got a laborer and a manager or boss or whatever, and there's an equal contract where both parties agree to go into work with one another. But this isn't what's happening in Somalia, as is the case with most of the African continent. These global North business entities come to global South nations like Somalia to exploit the land, to exploit the labor, and to exploit the mineral wealth. And we've seen this before in Somalia for the past 20 years. We've seen Chinese fishing boats, Iranian fishing boats, American, French, British, Spanish fishing boats, all illegally fishing in Somali waters, because Somalia's coast has an estimated 500 million worth of fish and other resources, now oil. They've recently discovered oil off the shores of Somalia. So these are mineral resources that companies in Turkey, France, Sweden, etc., they all seek to exploit it. Not only the minerals, but also the labor, right? The black Somali labor that will be paid pennies, if anything at all, for their work in extracting the profits that can be taken from this land and these resources, and then shipping them back off to Europe and North America. So it's very unfortunate to see that what has happened to the rest of Africa is once more going to happen to Somalia. This wasn't always the case, as for much of its history, Somalia has been a socialist state under Mohammed Siad Barre. But for many reasons, if you want to go into the details, check out my YouTube channel. I've got a 45 or 50-minute long video going into all the details on Somalia.
And I'll put it in the chat.
Definitely, please do. Yeah. Long story short, Siad Barre's regime fell after almost 3 decades in the early 90s. And since then, Somalia has just been in chaos, right? Political chaos due to conflicting interests from external parties. So you've had Kenya, Ethiopia, America, all 3 of those countries, as well as the African Union and the European Union, they've all had boots on the ground in Somalia at various points over the past 3 decades. And the reason why they've had boots on the ground is because they all want their either geopolitical or economic interests secured, right? None of them care about what the Somali people want. None of them care for the welfare of the Somali people. No one has ever really cared for their welfare and for their being, right? And even if we're to go back to the case of Somalia's mineral wealth on its coast, on its waters, like its fish, now oil. These companies have illegally illegally fished in these areas. They were chased off by Somali locals who lived on the coast, and all of a sudden saw these random companies depleting their waters of their food, right, of their food and their livelihood. These locals were then presented as pirates.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, because that's what led to a lot of the talk about Somali pirates.
Yep, exactly. And the reason, like, they call them pirates because one, they want to continue this portrayal of Somalia as a backward state that had its failed experiment of communism, and now look at them, they've devolved 500 years and they are pirates, right? Like, that's the image that the Western media wants to create. But secondly, it manufactures consent, right? It creates an image of Somalia in the Western public mindset that justifies the sending of US troops or UN troops or whatever imperialist powers boots, right? They get sent to Somalia so they can deal with the pirates and establish democracy, establish order. All of these lies that we're taught on the media, and that's what we're seeing again. We're seeing a Somali state that is operating in the interests of the West and its corporations, and not the interests of the actual people. In the most recent election, actually, the Somali people did not get to vote, right? There was never a popular election. In fact, it was the MPs who decided who would be the next president, not the Somali people, but the MPs, who they themselves were even installed in power by various clan elders, not the Somali masses. So once more, there's no democracy here, right? You haven't had a single popular election. You've just had bourgeois interests installing political leaders in power and making economic decisions with the UAE, Turkey, the US, whichever global North imperialist power you want to pick. They make economic choices that align with their business interests. But once more, the Somali people are forgotten. They're left behind. They're left without a voice. And over the next 5 to 10 years, unless we see any radical change, we're just going to see their labor exploited. their lands exploited, their resources exploited, and the profits of all of these exploitive activities will once more be expatriated to the global north, as we've seen in the rest of the African continent.
And I wanted to give everybody a heads up. This is the link to the Somalia video that's on Malick's channel. I definitely highly recommend that you guys check out his channel. He normally puts up a video. What is it? Normally maybe once every 2 weeks, or maybe about once a month or something like that. But they're very good.
Yeah, you're right. Once a month or so, but I've been lacking recently, to be fair. But I'm trying to get back on track.
Well, I'm gonna pester him as much as possible to do more collaborations. I want to bring Google Leithu in because he has a lot of knowledge on blockchain and supply and how a lot of this stuff would kind of be implemented and some of the, I guess, economic factors that are going into play on some of this stuff. So Google Leithu, can you help us out a little bit and give us a little bit more context of what's going on, what they're talking about out in the Horn?
Okay. Thanks a lot, Malick and Alphabet, for the intro on what's happening in Somalia. I think what stands out for me is, it's the case throughout like all of Africa, where we've got the West and the USA interfering in our own internal matters, right? So with Somalia, already Somalia it's more of like a distribution center and hub for the CIA-driven drug supply chain that comes from Afghanistan, and then they use the Horn of Africa to start moving drugs all the way to Western Europe, Southern Africa, and all over the world. So it's almost like Somalia. It's something that it's a sphere of influence for them for their own drug supply chain. Obviously, there is the oil also there that they need, and it's sad because the USA goes as far as creating these terrorist organizations like Al-Shabaab to justify them sending peacekeeping missions. That's why they call it peacekeeping missions. But in actual fact, it's disaster causing missions, because it's never about the locals. It's never about the people of Somalia or East Africa or any other part of Africa. Wherever you see the West deploying their military forces, is to secure their own interests. And I think Malick also mentioned, the issue of pirates. I always argue with people that, there's nothing called Somali pirates. This is just a creation by the West to justify, to create an impression that there's lawlessness, there's lack of order in Somalia, and that's not the case. For them, it's just justification for their own, for their own agendas that they are pushing there. And also, they also dump lots of waste on the Somali shores. Which is, and when the people of Somalia try to fight that, those people of that dump Chinese ships, US ships, and whoever dumps their toxic waste in the Somali shores, and then Somalians start being referred to as being pirates. It's the case, like I said, all over Africa, where we see the West is when, especially now when they talk about the New World Order, it's almost like it's a second wave of colonization. It never really stopped. What happened is, it moved from where you had political forces, like clear political forces, running the affairs of African countries, and then they transferred that power to corporates, right? So now it comes across, like Malick said, as business interests. The US contingent is here to do business with Somalia and so forth, and all other African countries. But in essence, those multinationals, those corporates, they're pushing the foreign policy agenda of the USA and of the West. I'm sure we've all seen Glencore recently, the commodities trade and mining giant Glencore. They found guilty, by the US courts. I mean, for manipulating markets and all other people, in different countries. And that goes to tell you there's not going to be any real repercussions for them, because at the end of the day, it's a distraction. They'll get scot-free from it because their model of business is to manipulate. And unfortunately for us in Africa, because we're rich in resources, we are the prime target. We had the USA recently, issuing a warning or threatening African countries that are going to continue doing business with Russia. This whole big brother mentality whereby we have to be babysitted, as Africans. And I think it's time that it really stops. And the model of democracy that we see in Africa that we've kind of like adopted, it's unnatural to us. It's something that has been created by the USA, and at the end of the day, we're wasting lots of funds and resources and time trying to elect leaders into position of power. Meanwhile, um, on the back end, the leaders are already chosen by the West. They basically, it's just a mere formality to say we're having an election when they've already, have their preferred candidates. And wherever they don't have their own preferred candidate take over the reins, then they make sure that they create instability. They sponsor instability. They've captured the media altogether, and so they kind of like colonize lots of people mentally. So you end up having indigenous or local people turning against those political leaders or business leaders that actually represent the interests of African people at large. And I think, the only way that we can come out of this hellhole is to start to unite as Africans, because the problems that Somalians are having is the same problems that we're having here in South Africa. It's the same problems that Nigeria is having all over Africa. It's the same. The West has never changed its attitude towards Africa.
And I would throw in, because I've noticed recently Sudan has been having a lot of the climate change effect that Somalia is having also. And they're having like a lot of mass starvation. And I mean, I just wanted to throw that in there, that I feel like that part of East Africa has been getting really hit from multiple sides, and Somalia is getting a little bit worse than Sudan because they're having, the political aspect, especially with the finding more of the resources. Malick and Alphabet, I want you guys to just hop right in there. I want to keep this conversation flowing because you know all of us, it's as if we were sitting down in a coffee or tea shop. I wanted, to be wide open, and I want our audience to be able to hear this. And then I'll read this comment from Yona because, me understanding a little bit more about Latin America, this kind of speaks no more to what I envision, because I've only been to a little tip of Africa, so I haven't been all the way through, but from what I've read and learned, a lot of it's similar. It says Yona pro tip, read Eduardo Galeano, Open Veins of Latin America, Venus Abierta de Latam. So yeah, I agree. It's a very good book to read and explains what's going on. It's almost like after the Western powers came into the Americas and they exploited it, and then they started with the colonization and slavery. After they did that, then they exported and went back to Africa and attacked it as a whole, breaking it down bit by bit, whether it was France or Great Britain or Denmark or Sweden or all of these different nations went and just descended on the whole entire continent, exploiting it of every possible thing that it could. And so what we're seeing is the same colonization, but it's done in a day where there's far more visibility as far as like social media, television, and all those things, but even more seclusion of what's going on. It's kind of weird to me how there's so many more outlets and resources to show what's going on, but it seems like it's being almost more shrouded, in mystery or hidden than I feel like it probably was maybe 100 to 200 years ago. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I would say, like, I agree with what you just said, in the sense that, and I think the reason for that is, they have to. They're first of all, they're in control of all the media in terms of like mainstream media, etc. They're never going to,
Mm-hmm.
even the quote unquote left mainstream media is no, like it doesn't exist exist. It just doesn't exist, really. They're just for their people. They're for the imperial core in the end of the day. And Africa is sort of seen as a bank. It's a bank. There's no people there. There's no humanity. Just take what you want, violate, treat however you want. It's like a shopping center for them that they owe nothing to. And I think like what our brother was saying earlier is important as well, in terms of how it's sort of like a parental patronizing situation in which they talk to Africans until this day. Like there's 54 countries, that's 54 individual countries in Africa alone. Which means that when you're telling us not to do this and not to do that, as just Africa should not do this and Africa should not do that, that's like causing us to become like a monolith for some reason, and we aren't. Africans are very diverse. I'm a Pan-Africanist, so I believe in African unity, expanding just globally, just not on the continent itself, but to all of our people everywhere. So for me, it's despite that, we can't treat Africans as a monolith. We have to respect each nation as one and allow them to make their own decisions. But when it comes to Africa, we're discussed as a big group, and it's like a big group that just doesn't know what they're doing. We're aware of what we're doing. We know that there's no interest for us in Ukraine. Really, why should we turn against Russia? This is not our war. Like, I hate this notion that they keep saying world war. No, this is a white war. Like, this has nothing to do with us. The global majority, if you include China, Russia, and Africa as a continent, and there's parts of the Middle East as well. Like, we don't care. This is just a European war. This is nothing to do with us. We have our own wars that plague us on a day-to-day basis, and they call them coups. But no, they're strategic wars that they set up to get their leadership, their desired leadership in charge. So for me, I think it's also important to, in regards to what you were saying about the slight difference for Somalia, I would say that the only difference I would say also for Somalia is that at the current moment, the political thing is not something that's new for us. We've been, apart from the time when Said was the leader and we had our socialist Somalia, and we didn't really have peace. We've been at war with Italy, we've been at war with the French, we've been at war with the Americans, the British. So it's like this weird sense of they've not grasped yet that we refuse as a people. We don't want to be broken down. We will never be broken down. We don't want to work with the West. We've seen what they've done. We've seen what they're capable of when it comes to Africa and African bodies. So this isn't new for us. It's just like another generation that's going to be traumatized once again by trying to fight white supremacy. And I think, like Malick pointed out, because of Somalia's geographical location, if they were to destabilize Somalia, they would have easier access to Ethiopia, which is a country they've never really had access to. They would have easier access to Eritrea. They'd have Djibouti. Like, everything would just open up for them if they got that, because Somalia's coastline is the longest one there in Africa. So they need that. And once they get that, they can just pillage it and use it, and then just start to slowly move across Africa. And for me, the New World Order for me would be when Africa in general turns its back completely on the West, because it's not our concern. It's not our concern at all. That is my desired New World Order. Let me also clarify, I don't trust Russian interests or Chinese interests, personally, because I feel like everyone wants a piece of Africa, and every nation is going to say and do whatever, and shield themselves in whichever way. But for me, my interests are with the African people and Africa as a nation. So not as a nation, as a continent. So for me, I think it's important that we make sure that we do these business deals, but make sure that that's all that they are. They don't become dependency, and we have to just leave the West behind. That's my personal view on that.
No, I think that's a great, great to put in. And I want people to know, because since I talk to people from all different parts of the, all different parts of the world, I want people to understand and be clear. Just because I don't come out and necessarily make a big deal about Russia and their involvement into Africa or China or India or any of these different nations, doesn't mean that I am like cheerleading for any of it. I have less of a problem with it than the US, because I believe that Africans, and I'm not saying this is a monolith, because for those who follow me know that I always say that Africa is the most diverse continent on earth by culture, by by DNA also. So that's something that needs to be put out there and always thought about. But I feel like the continent itself, there are 54 individual countries, just like Alphabet just mentioned. And I believe that they all should be able to have the right to control their own destiny. So if this nation says, you know what, I don't care, I will run my country exactly however I want to. I will have my different faiths, my different religions, my different, whatever I feel like doing, and let them decide who they want to have, their relations with. Because it reminds me back to the famous Ted Koppel interview when he's sitting down with Nelson Mandela, and they're trying to press him on how South Africa should take a side on the side of Israel over Palestine. And he's like, whoa, wait a minute. Africa, we're South Africa. We make our own decisions on what's going on for us. You guys worry about whatever the hell you want to. So whatever they do in their nation is their business, just like whatever we do in our nations is our business. And you guys need to start respecting Africa, the continent itself, all of the 54, countries and nations, to make their own decision and chart their own destiny. Yeah, just wanted to say that, Alphabet.
I agree with both your inputs. I think, like you've said, Marcus, in as much as China and Russia, they've got their own economic interests. But as Africans, I think we've suffered a lot under British and Western imperialism. And in most cases where we have fought liberation wars, it was Russia and China really that assisted in that in terms of military weapons and so forth. But obviously, that doesn't take away the fact that China and Russia would, naturally have their own geopolitical interests, because Africa is a resource-rich continent. And I think our biggest challenge is that we do not control our supply chain as Africans. We've got all the resources, but there's absolutely nothing that we are creating for ourselves. So at the end of the day, with all the resources that we have, we still have to rely on the West in China, for imports. Let's look at the DRC Congo. More than 70% supplies of copper, right? But you look at the state of the country. The biggest company that now owns the copper in DRC is Glencore, right? Which is, and then they export to biggest export market is China. China does the processing, and then they move the stuff all the way to the West. But it all starts from Africa. So up to until the point where we say we're going to control our own supply chain, we're going to create beneficiation, then we will never get it right, because this is an economic war. And the West understands that, without Africa, nothing can move. So all these wars, all this instability that we see in Africa, it's just a bug of the West wanting to maintain control of our resources. You look at the war that happened, that Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the uranium was from the DRC, right? Right now, you look at the West and in the USA, they've got lots of nuclear programs going on, but we are not allowed to have any nuclear programs. You spoke about climate change earlier, Marcus. Here in South Africa, we've got like massive coal deposits. But at the COP26 summit, the West and the USA, they decided that South Africa must phase away coal usage as a form of energy, and we must rely on the wind and the sun because of pollution and climate change issues. But at the end of the day, what they're doing now, just in the last week alone, Europe, Germany, France, and them, they're getting lots of coal from South Africa, right, to power their own plants, because now they're involved in a war with Russia that we've got nothing to do with. Russia has cut the supplies for gas and coal. Now they've decided that South Africa must just, do away with coal. We must phase out coal energy, and then instead we export the coal to them, which is also, a sign of how they view us. It's almost like we're a kindergarten kind of thing, and we are kids, and we must be they must always make
Managed.
prescriptions of how we must live as as Africans. So that's why this whole climate change, it's part of their agenda. Again, there's there's a lot of dishonesty in it, right? So if coal is a problem, why is it a problem for South Africa but not for Germany, not for France? Why are they even wanting the coal for themselves? So we need to confront that reality that up to until we control the supply chain and the flow of our resources, will continue to be will continue to remain servitude to Western interests. So we really need to confront that. And I think as it stands, I mean, we've tried. I mean, with the democracy elections thing, and it really doesn't work. It has never worked, because at the end of the day, the West chooses for us who must lead us at any given time. If they don't get their preferred person, they destabilize. So we actually need a revolution, and I think we need like-minded Africans to start getting together and sharing ideas, because the bottom line is that what we're facing as Africans is not limited to one country only, but it's the whole continent. So we share a similar struggle, and we need to unite. Previously, the wars of liberation, individual African countries had to collaborate with Russia and China. But now we need to understand that even if we are to seek further collaboration with Russia and China, it must start with us as Africans. And when we go to the negotiating tables, to use an example with China, China gets lots of good deals from Africa, right? That really do not benefit us. And we're using our own sovereignty as collateral, right? But you cannot blame China for coming out superior there from the negotiating table, because as Africans, who are we sending to negotiate on our behalf? There's nothing wrong with trading with all these different countries. But the problem is, the people that are in power do not represent the interests of the broader African community. They're only interested in getting incentives for themselves and their families and colleagues and all those people that are close to them. So we need to start, extending our thinking from individual glory to, community victory. So up to until we get to that point where the governments of the day in Africa, they robustly approach this whole global trade business, then we will never get it right. We've got the African Union. It's one of the most useless bodies. I mean, they just go and sit there in Addis Ababa. Nothing ever comes out of the African Union. As it stands, we are China building the African Union Parliament or so forth, or the headquarters there. With all those resources, now we are relying on China to build an African Union headquarters for us. In exchange for what? So it's not China's goodwill. They've got interests, they've got geopolitical interests, and they will make sure, for as long as we allow it to happen, for as long we let this continue, they will continue to benefit. They will never stop and say, we've really Africa has suffered a lot under us. Let's stop for now. They will never stop, because they understand that their economies depend on Africa.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Alphabet.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to add on top of that, brother. I think it's important that we pay attention and we support, like the Mali situation. I don't know if a lot of you know, but I'll just give a brief history. In Mali, there was recently a coup.
I know for a fact the audience doesn't know. So go ahead, take your time with it. Break it down for us.
Yeah. So recently in Mali, there was a coup. Supported majority of the Malians themselves on ground. I've spoken to a lot of them. They're in complete support. Their new leader Assimi has taken over. President Assimi has taken over, and with that interest, he's essentially he's demanded that the French leave. He's even got as far as telling them they can't even fly their French aircrafts above Mali lands, etc. Due to that, now they're currently being sanctioned heavily by African countries included, because of the leadership's interest in, not the people, but the leadership interest in the West. So I think what we need to do is we need to try and continue to support regime changes like Mali. We need to pay attention to regime changes like Mali. Assimi, as far as I have seen so far, has taken a lot of pride in in restabilizing and making sure that when he is negotiating with these people, it's in the interest for the African nation and for his people in particular. And due to that, he's facing a lot of Western backlash. They keep calling it a coup, but it's really a regime change that is actually supported by the people of Mali themselves. He's liberated them from the French patronizing partnership that they were like under, because French is I'm sure Malick, you can add to this better, so I'm gonna let you add to it. But the French in particular have a very bizarre and destructive way in terms of their ex-colonies and the way that they deal with them. And Malick is perfect at explaining this, so I'm just going to pass it over to you, Malick. But yeah, I would say 100% pay attention to Mali, support them. I know recently a questionable character, let's say, from Guinea, but nonetheless, the people of Guinea have decided to support Mali and go there and help them. And so it's like we need more partnerships like that. I'm not saying I trust the guy from Guinea at all, but I do trust the CME. So far, he's been sticking to his word in terms of making this a no more situation. He wants African leadership to work for their African countries, and so far he's been doing right by Mali. So we can just hope that this will continue. But I'll let Malick take it off from there.
Yeah, I think you basically explained it very well. It's exactly that. That's what's going on right now in Mali. Like with Mali, Guinea was also a former French colony, and all of these former French colonies were treated by France under their foreign policy strategy known as France Afrique, which means French Africa. The way that they saw it was West Africa had to be their backyard, right? The same way that Latin America is North America's backyard, right? Like that's where their American interests are just number one, like Spain, you're not involved.
Yeah,
France,
their version of the Monroe Doctrine, basically.
Yeah, basically that, right? They are the kingpin, the kingmaker, the number one geopolitical power in Latin America. And in a similar way, France is that in West Africa. That was the strategy that it came up with after independence. And so it did this by forcing all of these nations to sign cooperation agreements in order to become independent. And these cooperation agreements required them to, for starters, adopt the franc CFA, which is a literal colonial currency. If you want to Google it, type in CFA space franc, but with a C instead of a K. This is a currency where, I mean, you can already tell from the name, it's already got French roots in its name. But with the franc CFA, firstly, on its economic regulatory board, half of its advisors are French advisors from France. The franc CFA is directly tied to the euro. Before that, it was tied to the French franc, but then France joined the Eurozone, so the currency changed. Until a few years ago, this has changed literally in the past 5 years, so recently. But until then, all nations with the franc CFA were required to deposit half of their gold reserves in Paris. So it basically limited their independence. You can't, as a nation, you cannot pursue your own economic plan. You cannot pursue, let's say, nationalization of corporations, businesses, and mineral wealth that was controlled by colonial entities, right? You can't nationalize these things if half of your gold is sitting in a bank in Paris, right? Because what happens? What happens if you're Mali? What happens if you're Guinea? What happens if you're Burkina Faso and you say, hey, France, you control this gold mine, you control all of these silver deposits, you control all of I don't know, these palm oil plantations, right? You control all of these money making things in our land, and the only reason why you control it is because you came in and you colonized, and when it came to independence, you retained control over those things. You retained control over our mineral wealth. You retain control over the colonial businesses that exploit our labor, right? And we want it back, right? If you're one of these countries and you say we want it back, that's only fair, right? That's only fair. When the US became independent, or rather fought for its independence, it didn't become independent on the condition that Britain retains control over American businesses. No, right? America took control over all business entities and all national resources within American waters. former French colonies in West Africa didn't have that same benefit, right? We had flag independence, right? We had our own independent political nations, but economically speaking, colonization never changed. Instead of being in the hands of the French state, it was now in the hands of French companies and corporations. And again, with half of your gold sitting in a French bank in Paris, you cannot nationalize those entities. You cannot retain, or rather recover control over what is rightfully yours, what is rightfully sitting in your lands. And the purpose of this was to basically evolve colonization, right? Because butt naked colonialism, as it had always been, direct control from the metropole in the periphery, that was aged, right? That was becoming old, and it was becoming inefficient, expensive. There was a rising tide of resistance, right? And the countries that chose to continue the system, like Portugal, they had to fight wars, right? Portugal had to fight wars in Angola. They had to fight wars in Guinea-Bissau. They had to fight wars everywhere where they tried to retain this old colonial system. Whereas France ran into that issue 2 decades before Portugal. So in Algeria, they fought for their independence, and France learned from Algeria, and they learned from Vietnam, where they got rinsed at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. I'm probably saying that wrong. But in Algeria and Vietnam, France got absolutely demolished and embarrassed, and they realized quite early on that direct colonization cannot continue. So they switched to this neo-colonial system that allowed them to continue colonization, continue economic exploitation, but this time with so-called flag independence for these African nations who they were exploiting and reaping the benefits from their land and labor. And this has always been the case. Like, this is still the case in Senegal. This is still the case in Burkina Faso and Niger. There have been a few hiccups here and there. So in Burkina Faso, you may have heard of Thomas Sankara. He came to power, nationalized the country, made sure that it was entirely independent. So under Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso didn't require a single penny of aid, not a single penny. They were entirely self-sufficient. They produced enough food to feed themselves. Literacy rates went through the roof. The country was really prospering and developing under him. But unfortunately, as you may know, France had him assassinated and replaced with a neo-colonial dictator who continued the system of France-Afrique that they had planned for the wider region. And so this was also the case in Mali, right? This is why the Malian people support Colonel Assimi Goïta. This is why they support the military junta, because they are anti-France. They are anti-France-Afrique. They are anti-imperialism. They're anti, the exploitation of their country, because this is what Mali has suffered through, right? Like Burkina Faso, like Senegal, like Guinea, like everywhere else that France was formerly colonized in the region. Mali chose to break free from this system, this foreign policy exploitation from France. And so they've kicked France out. They've also kicked Sweden out, because Sweden has decided to stand in solidarity with France, right? Despite claiming that they have no role at all in imperialism, Sweden did have troops in Mali too. And instead of doing the right thing, instead of supporting the wishes of the politically expressed wishes of the Malian people, they decided to stand in solidarity with France. So you see this pattern everywhere in Africa. Nations like Denmark, Sweden, Germany, you wouldn't maybe traditionally associate them with direct colonization as much as France and the UK. But if you look at their economic and business interests, they are totally aligned. And that's why they stand in solidarity with one another. So I hope that Assimi Goïta does the same to Sweden as well. I hope he kicks them out, and Denmark too, and the rest of the countries that are choosing to stand in solidarity with France and its imperialist agenda.
Well, that's something that I just thought about, and I'm glad that I have you on here, because I remember you tweeted something out. What is it? Probably maybe 2 weeks ago now, about those different nations and their imperialist ties, and and it got a lot of buzz. You know which tweet I'm talking about, of course. And I hopped in on that, and I got Google Letu in also. And we were going back and forth with some of the people. And I noticed even Riddle Me, who I see out there in the chat, also got involved. And I hear these various different people from Sweden or Denmark and all these other countries. Even Russia will be saying, well, we didn't have anything to do with anything. Or even here in in the so-called West, they'll say, well, I'm first generation into America or the UK or Canada. I didn't have anything to do with slavery. I didn't have anything to do with colonization. And they don't realize that your country might have been the country who built the ships. Your country might have been the country which built the chains. Your country might have been the country which funded it. That was the banking. Your country was the country who came in and who were exporting the goods, whether it was copper, gold, cobalt, whatever it was. Your nation had an involvement, and I often, like my brother out there, Shadow says, say Indo-Europeans. There was no Indo-European nation that was not involved in the genocide, the slavery, the colonization that African people throughout the diaspora have experienced. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about the continent itself, talking about the people who are who have went into different parts of Asia or the Levant, or people who are in South America or Central America, or into North America, and even into Europe itself. So there is no Indo-European nation which gets to say, well, I didn't have nothing to do with any of this. I mean, am I wrong, panel?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think that that's this like cognitive distance that they use to try and displace themselves rather than looking into their own history. They try to convince us of ours, which, I remember that tweet, by the way. It was hilarious because the amount of lies and half-truths that were being told was ridiculous. And I think what we also need to do as African people is like not be afraid, just to add to that, not be afraid to help each other as nations, which is why, like I pointed out, the Mali and Guinea partnership for now. I mean, I don't trust the man from Guinea himself. Malick can get into that a bit further if you'd like, but I do think it's important that as Africans, we do stand by each other and we do at least help each other, because in the end of the day, we will need each other. Just like they've constantly unified, be it in terms of their gaslighting, in terms of their colonialism, their slavery, they're constantly unified together because they share a common interest. We need to share that common interest with each other. There's no point in, like, for instance, my own country, Djibouti, I consider it a failure of a country right now. Djibouti and Somalia used to be one country before colonialism, and colonialism separated them into two. So Djibouti was French Somaliland, and Somalia is like the Italian Somaliland, and that's what happened. But right now, Djibouti is essentially on the side of the West 100% of the way, and that's because they have not cut themselves off of the ties of the French patriot patronizing parenthood that they've got right now. Even till this day, there's French military bases in Djibouti, there's American military bases in Djibouti. I believe there's also a Chinese base that's not being developed in Djibouti. None of these make sense, but it makes sense for them to place themselves there strategically because Djibouti is right. It shares a border with Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia. So it's the perfect place to just sit there and wait for things to happen. And as soon as they're destabilized, you run in. And just to say, like, when I mean, like, we have to help each other out, I'll just bring in, Malick brought up Algeria. So I'll just add to that. Algeria, when it did decolonize itself, and it did get back its own interest by nationalizing their oil, what they did with that money was then pay off the debts of 14 African countries who were also colonized, just because they understood in that moment in time they need. And Algeria also has I think Algeria is also the place. I know Algeria is the first place as well that hosted the Pan-African, the first ever Pan-African summit. And it was also a shelter place for Black Panthers and African Americans who were fleeing political persecution from America at the time for fighting for their liberation. So I think that that's what we need to do more as a people. We have to understand that this isn't a my country, your country thing. This is a all of us are under attack thing. And we have to figure out how we're going to help each other. And when we can help each other, we should never be afraid of helping each other. We should always speak for each other. We should always, like, you have a platform and you do it so well, like you speak for the nations that perhaps people might not be listening to or paying attention to. And we just have to keep doing that, I think, as a unit, if we ever want to get past white supremacy.
Yeah, I mean, I try my best, and I thank you, Alphabet. There's a couple of comments which I wanted to read in here and kind of get you all's takes on it. And I feel like since I guess I'm the former military person, I guess I should probably start off with my opinions on this comment. Emma says here, Africa needs its own army. Well, the various different nations within Africa do have their armies. The problem is the Indo-European countries will not allow for Africa to chart its own destiny. And I know it's 54 different nations, and I don't like to talk about it as if it's one just giant blob, one giant country. But when it comes to dealing with colonization and imperialism, they almost need to bond together as, like five fingers being balled up and turned into a fist. That's the only way for them to push back, because that's exactly what the exactly what the colonizers do. When South Africa pushes back against Denmark and the Dutch, the Swedes, the Finns all band together and help push back. The same thing with Algeria. When the French are pushing against them, who helps them? The Italians help them. The Germans help them. All of these other nations, and through proxy, because a lot of these European nations, especially what would be Western Europe, are for the most part vassal and proxy states to NATO, which is bulk controlled by the U.S. It's the U.S. which is the puppet master behind the scenes, which is pulling all these strings, i.e., when the reason why all of a sudden they have a coup in a nation in Africa, and then they start pushing for Israel all of a sudden, and trying to legitimize that government there, when we all know that that's because of American interests, and American and typically British interests. And we're talking about the government, not the individual people or citizens. We're talking about the governments, which push for these things because they have to control these areas. And my boy Shadow was saying it the other day, how these nations, when Indo-Europeans start getting involved, they can't help but decide that they need to try to control. And he says right here, African self-defense equals fall of Indo-European hegemony. And that is what they know. That is what they fear. That is why they will not, on their own, allow for African nations to band together. That's the reason why they went against, that's the reason why the African Union is basically neutered. That's the reason why you don't see, you see minor pushbacks just from a leader here, a leader there, but their goal is to always keep division. And they learned this, going back to the Willie Lynch letters. Willie Lynch learned how to divide slaves apart and how to keep them pitted against each other. And all they've done is, extrapolated that into every other nation they went in and colonized. So after they went into Africa, they did the same thing with Asia. That's the reason why China and Japan had so many beefs. That's the reason why India and Pakistan had so many beefs, because the Western powers were always playing the two against each other. Now, I'm not going to go on a rant worrying necessarily about those other continents, other nations at the time, because we're talking about Africa. And Africa does not get enough attention in the West, not nearly enough, especially outside of the confines of either Africans who have immigrated to Western nations, or whether it is people of the diaspora of the continent of Africa. No matter what your faith is, no matter what your religious background, it has to be the push to say, you know what, this is the problem. This is the fire that's trying to burn down the house that we're all living in. This is the infestation of whatever pest, whether it is an insect or rodent or whatever, which is causing us the problem. what we need to focus on is how to deal with this problem, how to deal with this threat. And then we can hash out the own differences between us. But the problem is we need to deal with this threat and problem first. And Baba hopped in and said it was hard for her to find the channel. The interview that I did last night, talking about Julian Assange, I literally had to go into my own channel to find it because they weren't showing it. They literally hide stuff like that. And they hide whenever I have these conversations and want to talk about Africa, want to talk about imperialism, colonization. This is what happens. So, everybody out there who's listening, I appreciate you all for being involved in this conversation, for listening to this conversation. And please, I can't say it enough times. These three guests, please follow their information, their drives, their pushes that they're doing, because they have a wealth of knowledge. And the only way that the Western powers and people who live in the West are going to understand what is actually going on here is you have to talk to people who are from the continent, who have ties to the continent, who know people in the continent, who so without going on or rant too much longer, I want to bring Google Letu in here. What do you think about all that's been said from Alphabet, myself, Malick?
Yeah, I think you've all raised valid points. Especially I think there's a comment that you read here about that Africa is supposed to have its own army. That will be the most ideal thing, because as it stands right now, we've got individual African countries that have got their own individual or separate armies. But at most, these armies exist to maintain the status quo. You hardly find, it's rare where you find the army being on the side of the people. They use to maintain the status quo, to ensure that the West continues to have control over our resources and our economic lives. Also, if you look at the supply of weapons in Africa, we're not really manufacturing any weapons, even though we've got the resources and the minerals that are necessary for the manufacturing of weapons. We get still to import from the US, Europe, and China. So we're not really producing anything that will, make us more sustainable. We have to rely on our enemies for survival, which is, it means if it continues like this, we're really fighting a losing battle. And also what the West has done, when they created the what you call it, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. There were only 5 African countries that were represented. I think that was 1946. Most countries were still under colonialism. I think there was Egypt, there was apartheid South Africa, there was Ethiopia, which was there also. I forget the other 2 African countries, but still they were colonies of the British. And then in 1989, the West created what was called now, what is known as the Washington Consensus, and this is basically what drives the operations of the IMF and the World Bank. I don't know if I can share my screen or I can just read these 10 points.
No, you can share. Just let me know, and then I'll put it on the screen.
Okay.
Let me stop this. But yeah, just let me know when you have it up there, and we can go into it.
Let's see. Share screen. Okay. Is it visible? Can you see what I've shared?
Let me see. Nope, I don't see it yet.
Is it visible now?
No, let me see it. No, yeah, I'm not seeing it down there to add it.
Okay, let's see. Let's try this.
Or if you send it to me in the chat, I could I can put it on the screen also. Oh, whoop, there it is.
We've got it now.
Cool. Okay, cool.
Right. So I just want us to go through this part here. Like, what is the Washington Consensus, right? So it comes from a simple set of 10 recommendations identified by economist John Williamson in 1989. So these recommendations are actually the conditions that come with all these loans that the IMF and World Bank gives to African countries. I mean, the first point there is fiscal discipline, right? So you basically saying, if you talk about fiscal discipline, you're giving the IMF and the World Bank, sovereign powers to determine the course of your fiscal pillars. I mean, fiscal policies, redirecting public expenditure. In most cases, what happens is they advise the government to cut down costs on spending on social services, tax reform, financial liberalization. You're giving the financial markets to private banks, which are affiliated to the uh, to the to the World Bank. I mean, even the national banks or reserve banks, they basically pursue the policies of the IMF and World Bank. You've got trade liberalization. They've got all these nice terms that they use, to make it, sound all attractive. But at the end of the day, this trade liberalization, basically, it's all about, the West having an upper hand in terms of trade policies. You would know the USA that they created, they've got this policy called, I think it was introduced when Bill Clinton was still president. It's called AGOA, with different African countries, where they, but if you start that policy, I'll share a link with you. It's basically the USA that's benefiting, and whoever is benefiting from the African countries that are part of that relationship is the multinational companies that have got their roots in the West again. Um, Elimination of barriers to foreign direct investment, right? I mean, why you must, naturally and ask yourself, why is the West so determined to invest in Africa? Why is it so determined to go out of its way to prevent any barriers for investment? This kind of investment that's being forced upon African countries, because at the end of the day, it does not benefit us. Wherever they invest, they ensure that it comes with these IMF conditions that benefit them, and we basically use our sovereignty as collateral. Privatization of state-owned enterprises. It's happening all over Africa now, where private-owned entities are being, state-owned entities are being privatized, and wherever countries try to nationalize, and then the West starts creating instability. We tried here in SA under the last administration of President Jacob Zuma. The ANC came with a policy at their 54th National Congress that, we're going to nationalize the mines, we're going to nationalize the Reserve Bank and so forth. What happened after that? They made sure that all these people that are advocating for nationalization, they're being portrayed in the media as these people that have destroyed the economy of the country. And you ask yourself, like, okay, now there's a new administration that's in place, but South Africa remains the most unequal country in the world. We've got 10% white population owning almost 80% of the means of production, and now they're moving into privatizing the energy generator, which is called ESCOM. They've privatized the national airline. We had a defense manufacturing company. They're also privatizing that. It's called Denel. So they're not stopping at anything. We've got Transnet that's in charge of the ports and all the logistics. They're also getting privatized. So, privatization, because now what South Africa has done, especially with this administration, um, they've taken loans from the IMF. Just last week, we had 7 billion US dollars of a loan that was secured from the World Bank, and we were told that the loan is for the procurement of vaccines, COVID-19 vaccines. I mean, no one wants those vaccines at all. There's no business case for procurement of those vaccines. Um, our natural immune systems are just doing fine for whatever they're pushing with this virus, because there's an agenda that's being pushed there. But it's now being used as an excuse. So these loans get imposed on us because these leaders that we have in positions of power, they acting in cahoots with the West. So they take all these loans that compromise the whole country. For them, they still get to live comfortable lives. But for the rest of the population, it's poverty all the way, right? And then securing the property rights takes us back to the land issue that we've spoken about before. That it cannot be that we can say we are proud Africans, but we do not own the land, right? So in most cases, black people were pushed away from their own fertile lands to make a way for the colonizers that have used that fertile land for their own commercial purposes. Zimbabwe is one country that's a very good example where they tried to repossess the land. They actually did repossess the land, but because um, as Africans, what it goes back to what I said earlier, we do not control the supply chain and the value chain. So what happened is it was easy for the IMF and the West to ensure that the Zimbabwean land reform program does not become a success, because then they started slapping the country with sanctions. They made sure that Zimbabwe does not have access to all those markets for agricultural products that they were exporting, or minerals. They made it difficult for Zimbabwe to exist within the global economic system. And then the message that they send out to every other country that's thinking of nationalizing the land is, if you try to do this, you see what happened with Zimbabwe. This is what's going to happen with you. So you must never go this route. But meanwhile, the real reason why there hasn't been any beneficiation from that program is that it was sabotaged by the West. And this is what we need to understand as African people. And it goes back also, I think, to what Malick mentioned in Alphabet in terms of working together. At the time when Zimbabwe was pushing for land repossession, no African country really uh, supported the country, in ensuring that it's a success. We never had any African country saying, if the UK and the European Union and the USA is going to slap this country with sanctions because they've taken back their land, then we're also going to slap the USA with sanctions. We're going to stop trading with you. You're not going to have our platinum. You're not going to have our copper. You're not going to have our cobalt. No African country did that. So it's very difficult. This is not a war that we can win fighting as individual countries, but only if we unite unity of purpose, in order to fight this, because it's an economic war, and because what the colonizer has really mastered is to use the divide and conquer mechanisms, right? So, and unfortunately, the media is so polarized, and it's captured, and it's being owned by all these multinationals that are very close to the Western power system. So the message that they put out there, it's really destructive to the African side. So up to until we get to a point where we educate people about what's really going on, you give people the alternative truths, not only one narrative that's coming from Western sponsored media companies, then we'll never win the war, because we must understand that before we even take the war to the ground, we must win the war at a mental level. You still need the support of the people on the ground to wage a war against the West. And until you win the minds of the people, then you're going to have a problem. Then you're going to just look like a radical person who's not really wanting to follow the law. Meanwhile, the law of the land, as it stands, it's illegality. I mean, by any stretch of imagination, if you look at what's happening in Africa, and all these conditions that we're getting from the World Bank and IMF and China Bank and so forth, it cannot be legal by any definition. It cannot be moral at all. But it continues like that because the powers that be are determining really our future, and we are allowing it. And the only way to stop it is to start thinking in one. Is we might be different countries, but we are all the same. Our borders, as it stands, were created by the West for their own purposes and not for our own purposes. So until we fight as one, as Africans, then we will not win this war. I mean, to use the example of Ukraine, you must just look at the European Union, no matter how wrong it is with the USA, but just look at how united they are in dealing with Ukraine and Russian crisis. They're all united, even though to the extent of compromising their own economic benefits. Now Russia has cut gas supplies, coal supplies, so there's lots going on there. But the West is willing to sacrifice its own economies just to agree on one point that they must all support Ukraine and they must all fight Russia. So we need to adopt that mentality, and we need not be apologetic about it, so that we can begin to move from this life of perpetual domination from the West, and improves the lives of Africans. We're a very rich continent, very, very rich, and it's totally unfair that we kind of like exist to service the interests of the West. And Marcus, we've spoken about this before, that the West just views us in Africa as a whole as areas of economic activity where they can extract economic value. You look at of Ghana. Ghana is, they call it the Gold Coast, right? Because
Yep.
there's
Gold Coast, Ivory Coast, Slave
Ivory
Coast. Yep.
Coast. Yes, so they've got all this. For them, it's all about extraction of economic value from all these African countries. Zambia, they called it the copper belt because they're getting copper from there. Beyond that, they've got no interest in ensuring that we succeed or we progress. And it is very unfair of us. It will be unfair of us to even expect the West to be the masterminds of our progress, because the whole area of issue of colonization and imperialism is rooted in racism and eugenics, and there's absolutely no way. We just collateral. There is some of us that end up making it in whatever field we're working in, but at the end of the day, the Western or the white system requires labor, and the African provides that cheap labor that they can work with for their own benefit, and we get incentives as salaries that don't really make a difference. That's why you've got these philanthropists like Bill Gates and them. You never see them giving out monies or donating whatever they're donating to ensure that Africans reclaim their land. You never see them doing that. So even if you've got constitutions that say you must respect the property rights, because the property rights start with white people owning African land. So now if the law and the constitution says you must respect property rights, there must be a willing buyer, willing seller mechanism. If you want to get land, you must buy. You must ask yourself, why are these billionaire philanthropists not funding the acquisition of land, even though it was stolen? But then why are they not funding it? They don't do that because for them, they're not interested in Africans owning the means of production. They just want to give us cosmetic stuff, donations, and some vaccines here and there, which are not really good for us as African people. So it's for their own interests, and they continue to secure properties and land for themselves. There's an issue that's happening in Tanzania right now, in just recent weeks, where the Maasai people were, the army was unleashed on them because they're now being pushed away from their land to make way for the Arabian royals to do trophy hunting, right? So it just goes to tell you how our governments are complicit in this, act of continued imperialism. You look at the Tanzanian president. She, sometime last year, she appointed Tony Blair as her advisor. So if you're going to appoint someone like Tony Blair as your government advisor, you're going to definitely end up with situations like what's happening now, where the Maasai people are being pushed away of their own land. And it's the case everywhere in Africa, where you see, because Africa, it's a hive. The West calls it conservation, but there's really nothing that's being conserved, because you cannot preserve, by chasing away indigenous people from their own land. So it's basically what it is. It's white preservation, right? So again, if you study the history of all this conservation movement, how the National Park Service in the USA was started, because that's where it all begins. Again, it goes to racism, it goes to eugenics, it goes to the purity of the Nordic communities. That's what they're all about. So now they continue amassing land in Africa under the disguise of conservation. And in the process, black people are being pushed away from their lands. And as it's happening right now in Tanzania, there is not a single African political leader or president that has come out to criticize what's happening there. Everyone is just quiet. So at the end of the day, what's going to happen is the Arabian company is going to have its way. Thompson Safaris from Boston in the US, they run the Serengeti National Park, which runs across Tanzania and Kenya. They're benefiting from that. They're doing trophy hunting. Here in South Africa, we recently had a president who was found with millions of US dollars under his bed because he does trophy hunting and game auctions somewhere in one of his farms. And he's a sitting president. And you look at the narrative that the media is pushing, is being shielded from any blame. In a normal democracy, in a normal country, you would have resigned by now, but he's still there. Instead, anyone who's criticizing him is being targeted. And that's the problem that we have in Africa. We have got all these leaders that are complicit in acts of crime by the West, and they get shielded and they get protected. So we need to really unite as Africans. Wherever we see an issue happening, like what's happening in Somalia right now, it mustn't be a Somalian problem. It's an African problem, and we must approach it as such. And I always go to the extent of saying not only an African problem, but I always say it's a black problem. All black people across the world, and right-thinking white people can all, join in on the fight, because it's not as an isolated issue. What's happening in Tanzania, in Kenya, and all the other countries, we must, approach that as a united voice, an African voice, and not really trust on the current crop of political leaders, because they're simply not doing anything. They're just interested in their own self-aggrandizement, in their own comfortable lives. They don't care about what's happening to the men on the street. So yeah, I think that's my.
No, that was that was really good, and I definitely want to throw it over to Alphabet, and because when you start bringing up the eugenics and things like that, I've heard her talk about some of those different topics and about basically the racism that's attached to colonization, which we can't we can't forget about it or separate it, and we can't understate it. And then I know there was a couple of points in there that I definitely want to hear Malick's take on a lot of the conservationist stuff which they say they're doing. So I'll back out. I'll let you two hop in there and give your thoughts on what Google Lethu was saying. And they said that definitely have you back, and I'm going to try to make sure that I have all three of you back together more often. Well, I'm going to definitely, guys, have you all back more often.
Thank you. No, thank you. And absolutely, I agree. And the thing is, in terms of eugenics, so for me, it's become like a language that they have adapted to excuse their mistreatment of others. Like for me, just the basic things that we have to break down in terms of language would be the term civility, because the Western world has never known civility. There's a great map. I'll share it with you, Marcus, at some point, and you can share it with your followers in general. That shows like the conflicts of all over the world, like the huge conflicts in terms of like wars and stuff all over the world, as a hotbed. So over the past 4,000 years, and you'll just see like there's so many lights all over Europe, all over the Western world. In terms of Africa, there's like next to nothing in terms of when you compare and contrast them. And you have to understand that even when those lights are flashing for Africa, those include colonialism, those include all those wars that we're fighting for our own personal liberation. So it's not something that I would ever take comfort with. If the West calls you civil, to me, what they mean is you're acting to their accordance. You've adapted this Western notion of self interest and material gain over humanity, over dignity, over grace. Because it's, to me, I've said this before, it's not civil to rape, it's not civil to pillage, it's not civil to steal, to kill, to enslave. All of these things are far from civil in actual context, but they've painted this brush now where civility just means whatever the West deems acceptable. To me, that's an issue. Also, in terms of what our brother was saying in terms of democracy, I don't believe that the West has ever had a democracy. They're still suppressing Americans from voting
Yes.
right now. They're still suppressing people here from voting right now. So there's no sense of democracy that they've ever encountered for them to be going around the world, quote unquote, spreading it. That's just another lie. It's just another excuse. Their language that they use in general when discussing indigenous peoples, in particular Africans, is always very telling, because it's never actually sensical. It's always a contradiction to what the actual definition of the words are. And as far as the eugenics, I think it's easy to it's easy to see inhumane treatment on others once you've dehumanized them enough on a global scale. When you do see Africans, it's all feed this poor African, da da da. You never see the culture, you never see the people, you never see the history. They just paint this this image and this narrative that we're all just backwards savages who needed the West to come and save them. And now look, now that the quote unquote, because they believe that most of the West believes that the West has left Africa. The West has never left Africa. The West has been in Africa for the past 500 years. Since they first came there, they have not left. They are still refusing to leave. Even like in Mali, when he's telling them you have to leave, they keep trying to find roundabout ways as to why he should let them say, oh, we don't, how do you expect us to leave if you don't want us to fly? And he told them, like, the same way you guys got here in the first place. You got here by boat, so you can leave here by boat. We didn't invite you over here. So, and just in regards to the comment, no, you do not have the strongest democracy in the world. You have no democracy. You don't know what democracy means. So,
well, and sorry to interrupt you real quick, but a point that you hit on, because I don't want that to slip by the audience, because I know sometimes that some solid points will be brought up. This so-called civilization, most of the civilization is been built on complete barbarism. It's been built on the extracting of wealth, culture, and pain from other people to sit on top and then say you're wealthy. Anybody who walks around and goes and steals a bunch of money from people and then controls the narrative can tell anybody that they're civilized. But let's not forget what happened. Literally trillions of dollars from the African continent and Asian and America's continent has been extracted from Indo-Europeans, and then they turn around and call themselves civilized. That's really what Western civilization is. But sorry, going ahead, Alphabet.
No, that's another thing that they call themselves is wealthy. You can't be wealthy. And another thing I want to address in terms of Africa's debts, Africa has no debts. Africa is actually owed a lot of debt. If we count just the amount of money that one or two African countries are owed, that covers about the quote unquote debt that they discuss every time. We are owed quadrillions. Like, to me, it's also not civilized. Like, I live in London, right? So it's not civilized, the fact that I can walk into a museum right now and see African bodies that were dug up from graves, basically, from their tombs, from their resting places. And I can see that sitting there. And I can see you all bringing your children to visit corpses that you all stole. So that's not civilized. That is the definition of savagery. That is the definition of barbarianism. That is what this is. Democracy is not something that you can tell people you have because you allow certain demographics to vote on the back of others. That is not democratic either. Democracy would be if you all paid your debts back first. Pay African Americans their reparations. Pay African nations their reparations. Stay out of our lands. Stop meddling. You can't be going around spreading dictatorships and then calling yourself democratic. There's nothing about you that's democratic. It's just barbarianism after barbarianism and gaslighting after the next. But we won't be gaslit anymore. So for me, it's another point I want to make in terms of eugenics. It's easy to also separate Africans based on eugenics. Like, I'm Somali. Most of the time people will say, oh no, the Horners aren't real Africans, or the Horners will look down on other Africans. And it goes like that from the west to east to south to north. And we've all been divided. Like you said, the Willie Lynch letters, they've fully achieved that in Africa too. They've made us all think that, oh, we're separate because of phenotype. because of this. And phenotype is another thing that's barbaric to me, because you literally sat there and measured human skulls, humans' noses, humans' quote unquote bone structure, to then try and fit them into your narrative, your book, instead of just allowing people to live.
Yep.
The West is obsessed with controlling in every aspect of people's life, even in terms of literally their skull mass. So it's absolutely just barbaric. I'm gonna let Malick go on, and yeah, it's just barbaric. Just be careful of the Western language, and just make sure that you all question what it is you're being told. You can't expect a country who doesn't have full democracy themselves to go around spreading it through dictatorship. That is not democratic. You have to understand what civility is. You have to remember that a lot of these things that are being called civilized, if I go right now and I go into someone's house and I kill them, I molest their children, I rape their people, I sell them off, and then I take all their wealth and I say, well, you know, I guess I'll help you out when their great grandchild, comes my way, and I give them £10 and I say, you know what, now you're in debt. Now you owe me £20. That doesn't work out, and that's not civilized. That's not democratic. None of that is. So you all need to be very careful in assessing the language you're being fed, because the easiest way to spread dictatorship and savagery and barbarianism is through language and the use of it. As long as you can dehumanize people and you can make others sound superior, you've already won half the battle.
Yeah, and I'll throw in there. Gosh, I think I'm trying to blank on it, but this whole Mansa Musa, we talk about literally the wealthiest man ever to exist. Shortly, after the end of his reign, all of his wealth disappeared. Where did that go? That wealth went into Europe, and that wealth, which was taken into Europe, is the same very wealth that was used to go in and do most of this colonization. So I just wanted to throw that detail out there when they try to talk about, well, you owe this or you owe that. And for those who don't get what she was saying, because I know we use dollars. Pounds is just their currency. So 10 pounds would be roughly about at this point now like about $15. So just wanted to throw that in. But Malick, please hop in, sir.
Yeah, no, definitely. A lot of wisdom just shared. I would actually have to disagree with you on Mansa Musa. Yeah, the reason why I disagree is I think that people like Mansa Musa and people like, or states like the Mali Empire, Songhai, Great Zimbabwe, these are all great stories, right? These are all great history. And we definitely need to get these tales out. But at the same time, I have a fear that sometimes I guess we look to these things as models of development and models of prosperity, and it's true. As you pointed out, Mansa Musa's wealth was immeasurable. But I think to some extent we need to move away from that, because I think we should develop. There's this quote from P.L.O. Lumumba where he says, "Our measure of development should be not GDP and not wealth and not gold, but rather how we treat our disabled, right? How we treat our poor."
I want to clarify. I want to say that's the measure. I'm just saying that is how they were able to. That was how they were able to continue their barbaric, traditions. But yes,
Yeah.
I do think it's far more important how we treat each other.
Definitely, yeah, and you're right about that for sure. And I think in regards to like I agree with you there. In regards to development moving forwards, we definitely need to do that. We need to move away from how the West measures, let's say, democracy or stability or strength or prosperity or development, right? Like the point is that we need to move away from these things moving forwards. But we're not seeing that anywhere on the continent, right? Because all 54 governments in charge of all 54 nations on the African continent, they are all basically the Western back base, right? They operate their states as the West does, just with an African head of state or an African head of government. That's all that's happened, really. Africa's entities have just been Africanized, right? We've still got the same colonial territories, but they've just been Africanized. And even when we say Africa, we're buying into this European political project of Africa, right? Terms like sub-Saharan Africa didn't matter, right? They did not matter for us in Africa. In fact, Africa itself, like if you're in West Africa, let's say in modern day Senegal, someone in South Africa did not exist in your mindset, right? There was no major trading, or obviously there was contact, and you could have went down to South Africa if you wanted to, but for much of Africa, the major cultural, religious, and trading partner was the Middle East, right? Or like partners in North Africa, or even across the Mediterranean sometimes. Yeah, the point I'm trying to make is that even when it comes to Africa, the idea of Africa or the United Africa, to some extent, that is still derived from colonization, right? It's derived
Well,
from the
yeah,
political
the fact
context.
that we even call it Africa. I mean, I know a lot of people. There was a push for a while that they were trying to go back to calling it. And forgive me, I know I'm going to
Archipelago,
butcher
maybe.
this. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Malik.
Yeah, yeah, no, I've heard that as well. But I was thinking, isn't that an Arabic origin name as well? Because that was my only issue with that. Not
Well,
issue, but
well,
concern, I guess.
well. But the thing about it is, we got to remember that it would fall up under Afro-Asiatic language, and from if you look at the early inception, that whole kind of what would be considered Levant or Levantine areas is kind of where a lot of the major civilization actually started before everybody started branching out into deeper parts of Africa and into what is so-called the Middle East. With how is it the Middle East when there's no Middle West? There's no but I was gonna get. I don't want to go sidetracked off, but all of the people who are so-called Africans all were originally in those areas, and through migration patterns and all kind of wars and different things like that, they've been pushed out because a lot of people don't realize Arab actually just means mixed. And
Oh,
what
really?
that mixture is a mixture of African people, Asiatic people, and Indo-European people. And so even the areas that are considered Middle East or Asia Minor would have been, for better colloquial term, African people's lands.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. No, I wasn't aware of any of that.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, no, I suck at, like, I think that, what is that,
Well, because
anthropology?
because if you think of what Babylon is, ancient Babylon or Sumeria, that would be modern day Persia or Iran. Well, DNA genetically traced back to a lot of the people of Somalia, Eritrea, all being people who would have been the people who those original kingdoms, the original rulers of those areas. So when you start thinking back to the ancient Persians and stuff like that, it would have been phenotypically a little bit more closer to a more of an African phenotype with mixtures of some people with some of the more lighter or Middle Eastern complexions. It didn't become later on until a lot of the people from the parts of what would be modern day Armenia and Turkey and stuff like that mixed in with some of the trying to remember like the Umayyad Caliphate, that mixture there of Indo-Europeans and for lack of a better word, because I think in biblical terms, a lot of times Ishmaelites, that mixture is what took over parts of North Africa and the so-called Middle East.
See, okay. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, especially in regards to North Africa. And I wonder if Babylon has any relevance or tie to the Babylon mentioned by Rastafarian communities in Jamaica, because
Mm-hmm.
I know that's pretty central to
And
their
the same book from what was it? I'm forgetting his name right now. It's like Randolph Adolph or something like that. The book Babylon to Timbuktu, and so that all
faith.
like ties in.
I see. That's a cool link to tie. Yeah, I feel like there's so many links that we can tie that perhaps our education systems definitely do a poor job at tying for us. So it's definitely great to see that
Oh,
tied. And
I
yeah,
literally we were talking about this the other day when I went on my buddy Franco's show about how the education system, especially in the West, is about indoctrination. And how
Definitely.
do you keep people in control? Is first thing you do is you start destroying their information. If you go throughout and like for instance, ancient Greece, it's never really talked about the roots of those areas and how different they were. And like even the term Ethiopia, literally, if you translate it into Greece, it's the term for burnt face. And so they called anybody who was darker skinned an Ethiopian. And then it for a period of time, the whole continent of Africa was called Ethiopia. So it goes back to that racist lens that Indo-Europeans looked at anybody of a darker complexion with and
Yeah.
classify them in certain ways.
I mean, that's how deep it is, right? Like even
Oh, it's
right?
so deep. Like anybody who starts talking about like racism is a new thing, like no, it's not. The Greeks were literally some of the most racist people ever. I mean,
Definitely.
we say Niger being nice most of the time, but there's no soft G in Greek. So what would that make it if there's no soft G?
Jeez.
That's
Yeah.
literally what they were calling the people, and then that translates to Nigeria also, the land of leaps.
Yeah. It adds up. It adds up, and I think just adding on or building rather on the extent to which
Thank you, Emma.
racism and white supremacy is deeply rooted in language and in our concepts and like generative themes. Um, it's rooted in our people as well, right? Like going back to Tanzania very quickly, the fact that these conservation efforts of the Maasai are being driven by the desires of the UAE royal family to have hunting grounds, right? Royal hunting grounds in Tanzania. Um, the oppressor here, right? The colonizer behind the scenes here is not the white man. These are people from the UAE, right?
Yeah.
These are Middle Eastern people who by the logic of intersectionality and Western pop racism is what I call it. But by
Mhm.
this logic, these people are also oppressed, right?
Yeah.
And it just goes to show that racism evolves, just like colonization evolved into neocolonialism.
Mhm.
Racism has evolved into a system, a structure, an institution where you have brown and black people perpetuating racism and operating the levers of racial oppression, as we're seeing in Tanzania today. These are Middle Eastern investors, right? Brown capitalists,
Mhm.
and their exploitive desires are being enacted by black soldiers, right? By Tanzanian state security forces. Um, so I think for me, like in terms of how deep racism has become and how it has evolved just as colonialism has, it just really echoes the point that with these system structures and institutions of power, dominance, and oppression, we need to look less at the people and now at the mindset, right? Now at the mindset that it has cultivated, because this is in our leaders, right? This is
Mhm.
in African presidents. This is in when it comes to the diaspora, black community leaders, right? Like
Yes.
this is in our own. This is being perpetuated by our own and filling the pockets of a very small percentage of our own who are happy to exploit and happy to see the bulk of the black masses put down and exploited as long as it fills their own pockets. Yeah, that's the final point I guess I really want to hammer in regarding the evolution of racism.
Oh yeah. Google Letu, can you tell me which link this is? I have Baba in the chat asking for this link, and yeah, any of the links that you have, make sure you can provide them for me. That way, I can make sure that they're able to look up this information that we're pulling up.
Okay. So I've put a link on the chat for the
Which one
first
do
one.
which one do you want me to pull up first?
Let's just pull the third one.
The third one? Okay.
Yeah, just pull the third one.
Oh, this one, yeah. This one's funny. Or is it up on the screen?
Let's see.
Yeah, outrage at Prince William's racist conservation video.
Yeah. So there's a video to that. Maybe I'll share with you
Scroll down.
later. Yeah, that video. But basically, the background to this is so Prince Harry is he's the president of an organization that's called African Parks, right? So you can imagine he's from Britain, from the United Kingdom, but is president of an organization that's called African Parks, which was created in I think it's the year 2000. They manage national parks and protected areas on behalf of governments. And they've got a total of over 13 parks, and they've got the largest area under conservation for one NGO on the African continent, right? So some of the parks in Rwanda, they've got two. I've got a friend of mine on Twitter who just posted all those countries, Miss Wando. Two in Rwanda, there's two in Zambia, one in Mozambique, there's two in Chad, one in Angola, four in Malawi, one in Benin, one in Congo, and one in DRC. And this is a British organization, and they own all these protected areas. So they push indigenous people, and I'm just using the word indigenous because just for so that everyone understands what we're talking about. I'm using a language of familiarity, but because my understanding of the British and the West using the term indigenous to refer to African people, it's for them it's like indigenous is just another breed or another brand of animals, because that's how they actually view us all, right? So they push away indigenous people from their land, and then they create protected areas. These instances, I think Alphabet did mention that it goes back to the matter of lack of civility. You go to a park right now, even today, you can go to the Kruger National Park and just walk past there. You can easily get shot because it's a protected area. You're not supposed to be there, even though it's your indigenous land. And these are the Western people that are doing this. They're doing it to this day. So it's not like Alphabet mentioned, the whites never left Africa. The colonial system never stopped. It continues today, just that it's more sophisticated now. What they've done is they have put black colonial administrators to positions of power to manage their affairs, so that at face value, all you see is black people managing an economy, but no, they're managing the interests of these imperialists. And so they still run the show. They still, like I mentioned earlier, they're still amassing the land for themselves. They're creating all these protected areas and national parks, and then they do their own trophy hunting and activities. I'm currently working on an article that regarding the between Rwanda and South Africa. There's also, where they were transporting, it was the British people, right? They were transporting the leopards from South Africa to Rwanda, but it was all done under a cloud of secrecy, and just goes to show how far they really want to go with this whole conservation and creating an alternative world for themselves in Africa, because as far as they're concerned, they're the most purest race. So that's what they're preserving for themselves. And in as much as they're going to call us indigenous people, but we're animals to them, because they've done it before. They have auctioned black people. We spoke about the Bronx Zoo in New York the other day. There was a young Congolese boy who was being exhibited, then was put inside a monkey cage. And these are the people that we're being made to believe that they are civil, they're civilized, they're democratic, and we must use them as a benchmark for our own progression. And that's very savagery, because I cannot point to one thing that the West, at a material level, at a structural level, has done that exhibits any traces of civility. They've been savages throughout. The act of colonialism on its own, like Alphabet mentioned, it cannot be under any circumstances be viewed as civil act or as a sign of progress. It's barbaric what they're doing, and they continue to do that. And think Malik mentioned the evolution of racism. What's happening now? It's happening a lot in the Middle East. We've got lots of black people that are being auctioned to this day. I saw recently someone posted on Twitter of an online site where there's people literally auction black women there so that they can work in Qatar or wherever. They don't get paid anything, even if they're in those countries legally. Their passports get confiscated and then they get abused. It gets even worse in Dubai. In South Africa recently, we had an issue where some ladies started speaking out because now there's a rush for Dubai. Everyone is going there, but there's lots of crazy things going there where you've got those Arabs in Dubai. They literally, release their expression on the faces of the African women, and they're doing this to, satisfy their own fetishes. They'll never do this to Arab women or to white women, but they find it proper to do it to black people because we're not human enough for them. We are as good as animals. We just their tools of desire. They can defecate on us and our women and abuse us as much as they can because that's the evolution of racism. So I mean, up to until we reach a point that as Africans we realize that we are alone in this fight, because everyone else is progressing in a manner that they want to benefit from Africa. There's no one who's really coming on our side to help us or to grow with us. But it's a continuous exploitation at an economic level and dehumanization at an individual and personal level. If I go to Dubai now or I go to the UK now, as a black person, a black man for that matter, I stand a better chance of being viewed with the lens of suspicion, because as a black person, you're not human enough, to be a part of this civilization in course that the West has created for us. And also now there's this what they talk about Africa as a they say Africa has got the most growing population in the world. And I think Alphabet mentioned a great thing, that we need to be careful about the words that are used by the West in defining anything or everything at all. Because when they talk about Africa as a continent with great potential and a continent with a growing population, for them, the real agenda here is population control. The likes of Bill Gates, I mean, there's lots of evidence that has come of their plans of reducing the African population. And it starts with these contraceptive pills that they give to the women. It comes in the form of vaccines that they vaccinate our children. They create all sorts of viruses that leads to, deaths of lots of African people. So for them to say Africa has got a growing population, I don't know if they've done any study or scientific study that kind of like proves that African people are having the most sex in the world. I don't know where they get that idea from.
Well, what it is the European populations or Indo-European populations are declining. And so the fact that their populations are declining, it's that fear of being overrun. And if you've been doing dirt for century after century after century after century, that level of fear and guilt that, oh crap, when these people have the power to come back and push back against all the shit we've been doing, our ass is in trouble. And that's what it is. It's that fear. It's like if somebody who's been cheating on their wife over and over and over and over and over and got away with it, say they've been cheating for 2 years straight. That fear of getting caught starts to lead to irrational behavior. And if you've literally gotten away with every, sin and atrocity known to man with no pushback, that level of fear, I believe that you would have, an insecurity of a nation of people being able to push back against you for the shit you've done is immense.
Yeah, because they know that if with the numbers, they will lose the war. So they now need to come up with strategies of reducing the African population. Just recently at the World Economic Forum, the Bill
Yeah,
Gates,
and
the Bill
a
Gates
start,
Foundation and Pfizer, they have cooperated with Rwanda and Malawi to,
and I wanted to say this real quick because here's
yeah.
the crazy thing about it. I honestly believe if all these nations were able to be able to control their own destinies without Indo-European nations trying to control everything, I don't think that their mindset will be, okay, let's go slaughter them all. But because of that fear, they don't even want to take the possibility. I believe a lot of the nations around the world will be like, okay, just let us get our money, let us go over here, you guys go over there, and we just don't want to be dealing with you. But that fear that retribution is going to come back, that's what I feel drives a lot of this, and this constant need to keep the boot on our necks.
Yes, that's what it's all about. Like now, what they've done with Rwanda and Malawi is they've created this program where they're going to be Pfizer and the Bill Gates Foundation. They're going to be running trials on vaccinating pregnant women. So you see their target already. You can see this program where it's targeted. It's about population control. And there is no way in history where you can find evidence to say at some stage, okay, as African people, our population was growing too fast for the resources that we have, and there wasn't any balance. So now we need to balance up things. No, it's all European agendas where now they want to be the balancing factor. They want to decide for us that you too many now. We need to balance you up with the rhinos and the elephants. And exactly the same thing that they do in the animal kingdom with elephants and all these animals that they keep in captivity, where they decide at some random stages that we're going to do trophy hunting because the population is too big now, so we need to reduce it to manageable levels. It's the same mentality that they approaching the human race with, particularly Africans, where they say now there's just a lot of black people now, so we need to find a way of reducing this population because now they've gotten more sophisticated with us. They're not going to do trophy hunting shows and kill black people, but they're going to do this via the big pharma way through vaccines coming across as our saviors. Meanwhile, the real essence is they want to reduce the black population. And this is not to say they're not actually shooting and killing black people to this day. They're still doing that, but it gets suppressed because they run the media also. We've got Jeff Bezos, the Amazon guy. He wants to build in Cape Town the Africa Amazon headquarters, and he wants to build this massive office park on the land that's owned by the indigenous Khoisan people. And these people, they use this land. This land is of spiritual value to them. It's of spiritual significance to them. So now it's back and forth with the courts now, whereby Amazon is insisting on wanting to build there. And they've gotten permission from the city of Cape Town, but these organizations that are fighting against this. So it's a back and forth with the courts right now. But the very fact that, like you mentioned, Marcus, earlier, that the best way or the one way of destroying a civilization or people is to start by destroying their information and separating them from their way of life, because of all the land that is available in South Africa. Not that Amazon has got a right to any of our land, but then why would you want to go for a piece of land that is of spiritual significance to a particular grouping of people? That's where you want to build your office park. And it goes back again to what Alphabet mentioned. There's no civilization in the actions of these people. It's just pure barbarity. No sane person must reciprocate really what they're doing, because all they want to do is you want to destroy the information. You want to separate people from their way of life. They did it when they initially colonized Africa. They used religion, Christianity, I know, Marcus, you've studied a lot about religion. You are more an expert than me, but at a basic level, Christianity was used in Africa as a tool of colonization. Christianity was used to separate African people from their ways of lives, from their cultures, from their values, from their norms. And the damage to the African psyche and the mentality, it still
Well,
exists to this
you
day.
know I have to push back and say Eurocentric Christianity.
Yeah, Eurocentric Christianity, because eventually
Because it doesn't, because
yeah.
the definition, the way that the Western world understands even the Bible is incorrect. I mean, the Bible was actually compelled in, a lot of people think the Council of Nicaea in Europe or in Rome. It was actually compelled in Hippo Carthage in North Africa. And if you literally read the descriptions of the people, it's literally talking about all the main people of the Bible, you know, no matter who you're talking about, King Solomon, King David, all of these people are melanated people. That's
Could
what.
I just add something to that? There's a
Sure.
quote that I just remembered. I can't remember.
Mhm.
Malik might be able to remember who said this quote. I'm not too sure exactly who, but I do remember the quote. It was, they stole our land, they stole our wealth, they stole our heritage, our freedom, our identity, our liberty. Essentially, they stole everything. Then they gave us a book that says, "Thou shalt not steal." So to me, that shows they can't understand what they're reading half the time.
Yeah, I mean, oh gosh, such a great point. Such a great point, Alphabet.
You must break down those 12 commandments. They sound like most of them. Well, I think the Alphabet is saying they cannot read what they prescribing to us. But the way that they presented the information to us, it's those conditions, those commandments, is just a way of deadening our mentality and our way of thinking as Black people. Right now, if you go to any African country and you ask a child or even an adult person to give you a brief sketch or description of Jesus Christ, the image that they have is that of a white person, because it starts from school, right? The kids are being taught in Sunday school, and,
When
and,
it
and, and the
when it
material,
literally
the material that the books that they read, the materials, it shows the pictures of a white man with a
well,
long
and I was
hair.
gonna say, because you brought up Jesus Christ for one. That's not even up. The letter J didn't exist 400 years ago. That's one of the things that's already wrong. But when you read the definition, or not definition, but the description of what it says of so-called Jesus Christ in the New Testament and Revelations, it literally says his skin of burning brass. So
I would say, like, just for that, like, I would say, like, Jesus, and, or we call him Isa in Islam, we call him Isa. And for us, like, for me, I think that the closest description would fit the Yemeni people. They have dark skin. Some of them even look like East Africans. They have dark skin. They have woolly, curly hair. Like, and those were indigenous
yeah.
people that were still around. I think they're the oldest Arab civilization that's still around. So it's like these descriptions aren't accurate. Again, it just goes to show they're not reading what they're supposed to be reading. It's bizarre how you can read something and then just come back with the total opposite of what it just told you, and it's a basic description.
Exactly, and when you go into even and it starts talking about the angels and other people in the Bible, it goes into the same thing. And what they've done is twist things around to use them in the most sinister and evil way that can be used. I want to hear Malik, because Malik hasn't jumped in on this. I want to hear some of your thoughts, brother.
No, I'm in total agreement. I don't have much to add. Yeah, total agreement. I mean, there's another similar quote from Desmond Tutu where he says,
Yeah, this one is here. I'll put it on the screen.
When they came to our land. Oh, that was by Desmond Tutu too. Yep, yeah, definitely. I've heard a very similar quote where he says, when the missionaries came, we had the land and they had the Bible. And then we closed our eyes and then they had the land and we had the Bible. So basically the same point. that when missionaries well, actually historically missionaries paved the path for colonists. Often colonial so-called explorers used the maps and guides that were provided to them by missionaries who had gone before them in order to spread the word of Jesus and whatever religious mission they were on. So yeah, we can't divorce the role of religion from colonization, and with Islam, it's the same. To be honest, I feel like a lot of people position Islam as a sort of anti-colonial religion, and in many cases, it was. If you are to look at, for example, Sudan, with the Mahdi rebellion, that had a very strong religious drive behind it. And likewise, we see in Christianity with this guy in Malawi, I forget his name, Reverend John something, but he was a Christian pastor who led an anti-colonial rebellion there too. So both Christianity and Islam have been used to facilitate colonization, but also to challenge colonization. And in Senegal, we see how Islam did both, right? The Islamic Brotherhoods, the Moorids and the Tijans, they played a role in sweeping public opinion towards ending colonization towards the 60s. But if we look at the role of these brotherhoods in about 40, 50 years before that, there was this guy called Sheikh Amadou Bamba, who he's widely revered in Senegal. He's like almost like an Islamic saint to people in Senegal. And he was the founder of one of the largest Muslim brotherhoods in Senegal. He held so much power over the masses in the French territory of Senegal that the French had to exile him, just out of pure fear, right? Fear of his power, because if he gave the command to rise up and to rebel, then that's what would have happened. The masses would have rose up and rebelled. But he was a pacifist. And so after many years, when they realized that actually this guy's like Gandhi, right? He's not a threat. He is all about non-violence. They allowed him to come back to Senegal. And they realized that with the principle of hard work, which was central to his interpretation of Islam, with his central principle of hard work, that was actually compatible with the colonial authorities, because that's exactly what they wanted. They wanted the masses to be working hard, right? They wanted the masses to keep their heads down, right? To not think critically about the colonial regime and to just work and to reap profits for them. So yeah, the point I'm making is that throughout the entire African continent, we've seen all the major religions, we've seen both Islam and Christianity used to facilitate colonial rule, but also used to challenge and directly fight it. So I guess it's not easy to generalize with those two, but overall,
no, it was a strong point that you brought up. Very, very strong point. I don't think people understand that how the missionaries who went into all these different areas, they use the maps of the missionaries to send their militaries right after to colonize the area.
Yeah, that's exactly what they did. Yeah.
So I think in a nutshell, Marcus, we can.
I want to show this one thing real quick, because I think this is very interesting. That people need to notice. When you literally see the Pope, who the Pope is praying to. And so often you'll see these popes literally praying to a Black Madonna. And then you see you see a Black Madonna that they pray to. And then you go to here, there's another one. The Pope is kneeling down, praying to a Black Madonna. And then you see in Africa that they are praying to a white Madonna, which I don't believe you should be praying to Mary or Madonna anyway. I mean, the Bible literally speaks against that. But that also goes into Eurocentric Christianity and colonization, and goes back to the papal bull that was put out from the Roman Catholic Church to go in and basically obliterate any non-Christian nations.
Yes.
Sorry, I was just gonna say I have to leave soon,
Okay, but yeah,
before I do,
we can get ready to wrap this up, and everybody can do their plug the information, and I'm gonna put that. Oh, wait a minute, I got one question. I got to put this
yes,
one question up here. Baba asked this question. It is a tough question to answer, and I want everybody on the panel to give me their answers first. Alphabet, I'll have you go first after I read it. Baba says, how do we navigate this morbid, archaic savagery from the ruling class? How do we push them out? How do we tear them down? What is the answer to getting your power back?
Oh, that's a good one. I would
Yes.
say, first of all, I think what we have to do from the imperial core is obviously bear in mind that when we're talking about our own liberations, our own rights, our own fights, and our own revolutions, that we are accounting for the fact that when all of these things change, we can't then continue to oppress the people from outside of the imperial core, the people from the global majority. We can't rely on cheap labor anymore. We can't rely on all of these exploitive and dangerous economic systems that have already been put in place. It's not enough to revolt and cause revolution for ourselves in the most oppressive lands, right? We have to make sure that everything we do cannot be Eurocentralized. We have to make sure that we're keeping in mind the oppressed people everywhere. So when I'm talking about workers, it has to be including the child laborers that are being forced to mine cobalt in Congo. It has to be the poor Bangladeshi children and women that are being forced to manufacture our clothes. It has to be all of these things that have to come into play, and we have to be prepared to account for that. And not only account for that, we have to help them with their revolutions. And when I say help, that means by we don't go over there and save them. Even I, as myself, as somebody who's been living in the imperial core most of her life due to obviously the displacement and stuff, and the destabilization of Somalia and so on. So what we have to do instead is we have to empower them. We have to listen to them. We have to provide them with material support. We have to give back money. We have to empower their voices. We have to make sure that they're being heard. We have to platform them. We have to find out what the natives of those lands are saying. We have to, for instance, follow and keep pressure on those on our own individual nations as to what's happening to the Maasai people right now, what's happening in Somalia, what's happening in Sudan. All of these things have to be put to the forefront of our heads. We can't continue to see them as a back burner. We have to make sure that the revolution starts at the global majority, because only once they are liberated, we can then focus on how we're going to further liberate ourselves. Because right now we have a lot more liberty, sadly, despite us all knowing that the imperial core has many, many, many disadvantages. We still have a lot more liberty than those back in the global majority. And how I would say we start that is by the dismantling of white supremacy as a unit, right? The whiteness has spread its wings so far, like Malick pointed out, that now Black people are the perpetrators, Asian people are the perpetrators. It's not just white people anymore. So we have to make sure that we challenge and tackle white supremacy as a system rather than just a group of people. And we have to continue to fight for the liberation of those that are currently providing our lifestyle forcefully. Our phones right now, I'm talking to you from an iPhone, the cobalt that makes this phone work and vibrate and all of these things, that's been mined by a child. We have to make sure that we're being as economically safe as we can. That means buying refurbished products, recycling. We have to we just have to be very, very economically aware of our own expenditure, and we have to take our money, our funds away from all of these powers as much as we can. That means don't watch the BBC, don't watch CNN, don't pay attention to Fox News. All of these things we have to like try and do to change our own lifestyle, which will make our own lifestyle a little bit harder, a little bit more difficult, maybe even more expensive, but it's going to be nothing in comparison to the costs that we will have to pay to sustain ourselves when we no longer have to have the backs of the global majority to stand on. I would say definitely pay attention to, first of all, unionize, join a union if you can, pay attention to the language, educate yourself every day, educate those around you. I sadly don't have all the answers for that. I wish I did, but we definitely have to make sure that we are telling the truth. Firstly, we have to understand the truth in order to tell it. So we have to make sure that we're educating ourselves on a daily basis as to what it means for us to just wake up every day and just go to work, and what all these things mean. Walk more, etc. Like, do everything you can in your personal life to change the effects that the oppression has now reached. Sorry, not the effects, but the reach that the oppression has now reached. It's so deep, it's so integrated into our day-to-day lives, that we can no longer ignore it. We have to change our own day-to-day lives, and we have to change the lives of those around us. But we also have to bear in mind that whatever significant change we create in the imperial core means nothing in terms of a global aspect, and we're just becoming like, even if I say this often, even if we were to achieve communism or socialism in America and the UK and things like that, it would just essentially be neo-capitalism if we don't tackle the abuses and the degradation that we're putting the people of the global majority through. It wouldn't be communism as a whole. Workers don't just exist in the imperial core. Human lives don't just exist in the imperial core, and we have to have a deep understanding, and that starts with oneself, I feel, and those around you, and just do what you can every day. Yeah, that's my answer. Also, wait, I just also want to say shout out to Emma, who was watching and was making great points the whole way through, very on point. Yeah.
I forgot, I'm muted. I want to bring up everybody else's takes first and foremost, because I know we're all going to have different we're all going to have kind of maybe different points of views, or ways to fight back. I know mine is going to be definitely different and not as conventional. But yes, and shout out to Emma, and shout out to Hamza out there who gave me a super ray on Rockfin. I appreciate it. And I'm going to get to your comments shortly. Just in case Malick has to get out of here, would you like to respond? I figure I might, I don't know, everybody in the chat, if you guys want me to go for an extra 30 minutes or so, I could do probably an extra 30. I think probably Google Laythrough, he might be able to do an extra 30 also. So let us know. But if you got to go real quick, Alphabet, I appreciate you so much for being here and dropping so many gems of wisdom.
Thank you so much. I do have to go, unfortunately, but thank you so much. It's been a pleasure being here. Thank you for allowing us this opportunity.
Oh yeah, and I'll keep putting the GoFundMe up for everybody to be able to see. That's what I've been putting the GoFundMe up, and I've been putting up the link from Malick's channel talking about Somalia. So
yeah,
make sure you click on both of those.
Please do follow Malick's channel if you want to learn about Africa as a whole. Those videos have personally even taught me a lot. So thank you again. Thank you all. I love you all. Thank you for listening.
And I'll hit you up in the DM. We're gonna have you back again.
Yeah. Okay. Love you guys. Thank
all
you.
right. Much love to you too, sis.
Bye.
All right. Bye. But Malick, my brother, let's hear what your take on that question. Now, I'll put it back up on the screen again, and ask it one more time. That way we're clear. Baba asks, how do we navigate this morbid, archaic savagery from the ruling class? How do we push them out? How do we tear them down? What is the answer to get your power back? What say you, Malick?
Yeah, I've got a confusing answer, I guess.
I mean, same here.
Yeah, no, yeah, no, definitely. I unfortunately do have to bounce as well. So
Okay.
I'll try to keep my answer short. But essentially, I think that there's no easy answer to it. There's no easy answer to it.
No.
And I wish there was. I wish there was one way. I wish there was one structure or one theory, right? That could answer it all, but there simply isn't. I think that the closest thing to it is a comment I saw from Emma about revolutionary internationalism. I think that's maybe that has to be at the heart of any solution that we provide to the various struggles that we see around the world. But ultimately, we live in different worlds, right? Like, we live in different life worlds. We have different perspectives, different struggles, different challenges, different hurdles. So as a result, we're going to have different answers to all of the above, right? We're going to have different strategies, different approaches. What works in one situation won't work in another, right? Even within Africa alone, right, in the anti-colonial struggle, South Africa had a whole different challenge, right? The apartheid system was only really experienced in South Africa and Zimbabwe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everywhere else in the African continent, you didn't have that same struggle. You had a different struggle that required a different answer. The answers to this question in Guinea-Bissau were different to what it was in Somalia, different to what it was in Algeria. These all occurred at different times as well, right? Because whilst Algeria was free in the 50s, South Africa didn't really become free until the 1990s, and even then, is it free? Is it free now, economically speaking? You see what I mean? Like
Yeah.
the struggle continues, and the point I'm trying to make is that I think that we can't. That there is no single answer to it. I think personally, for me, I think that we just have to fight our own fights, right? We all, wherever we are in the world, we fight our local fights. We fight the struggles that we are facing. We fight the struggles that our communities, our local communities, are trying to overcome. And then once we succeed in our own fights, then we look towards other people's fights, right? Then we look towards our neighboring towns fights, our neighboring countries' fights, our neighboring continents' fights, right? Like that's how we need to do it. It's a local struggle, but it's a global challenge, right? Consider it that way. Lots of local struggles, all united by a larger global challenge. That's what I think.
I appreciate I appreciate you, Malik. And for those who don't notice, know exactly why I keep putting this YouTube link up. This is the link to the Somalia video which he did, and from there you guys can find his channel. Make sure you subscribe. Also, if you guys see his handle is in his name, it's Afro Propaganda. That is the name of his channel. Also, that is the name of his Instagram. Also, so make sure to follow him on all those sources. Alphabet. I put all this information in the description box so that you can find all three of our guests. Malik has to take off right now, and so appreciative to have him on here. And just like I said with Alphabet, I'm definitely going to have him back on for more conversations, because these are the conversations which inform people and allow us to try to think of solutions. And if you're not having the conversations, you can't think of the solutions. So I mean that's what I'll say. So thank you again, Malik, for for all that you do.
Definitely. Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, it's always a great conversation with you. It's been great talking to you as well, Google issue. Yeah, I'll see you guys later. Take care.
Alrighty, brother.
Thank you.
So I will put the question up one more time and ask you, Google Ethu. And yes, everybody, I'm going to do an extra 30 minutes or so, or until Google Ethu he taps out and says, "All right, I gotta go." So maybe another 30 minutes, maybe a little longer, and then I saw people in the chat saying, can I break this up into segments? And so since it was free flowing just like I enjoy, we hit a bunch of different topics. I'll probably just break this up into part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, and so on, and then we'll start releasing these on the What We've Been Thinking YouTube channel and on the Political Matrix Rockfin channel. So make sure to look for that, and I will be putting those out. But the question at hand from Baba Yaga says, how do we navigate this morbid, archaic savagery from the ruling class? How do we push them out? How do we tear them down? What's the answer to get your power back?
Yeah, that's a very direct and powerful question.
Yeah, very.
Yeah. And there's many answers to it, but the short for it, from my side, I think self-determination, that's the basic component for us, in how we approach this. And we must, start forming an intellectual military force. By intellectual military force, I'm talking about something similar to this platform that you have, Marcus, where we get to talk about these things and share ideas and highlight what's happening in Africa and all the other communities that are facing similar challenges. And then, because at the end of the day, we must understand that the current system, global system of governance, they are pushing this war using the media, which is mind control. And after the media, we've seen it happening. Their last resort is to use the barrel of the gun. And at some stage, we must find ourselves in direct confrontation with the enemy. And for us to reach that level, it starts with creating the right intellectual and ideological base, because then it won't help to confront the enemy when we are lacking ideologically. So we that's why we must use this platform, to educate and to teach and to highlight the challenges that we're having, because at the end of the day, we will need as many stakeholders as possible that we can work with. It's eventually the struggle is not just going to end up with discussions. It needs to be taken straight to the enemy, and there's costs to that. So we must definitely look into forming more collaborations with like-minded people, and grow this into a big organization, that's fighting for the liberation of African peoples. And because colonization is still happening, it never stopped. It's still happening, and the only way to win this war, is, like I said, is to formulate our own propaganda. There's nothing wrong with propaganda, because you're pushing a certain narrative, or you're exhibiting a certain bias towards something. So we need to pursue our own form of propaganda that is biased towards us, and we must not be apologetic about being self-centered for our own benefit, because that's exactly what the enemy is doing. They're self-centered, and we are being blackmailed into being all these, into being non-racial, and so forth. And also, I think what this system, the current power system, which kind of like favors the white population, has done is, in as much as they are brainwashing Africans and black people and Asians, they're also brainwashing Europeans and other white
Well,
countries.
it first has to start with brainwashing their own people so they can get
Yes.
away with doing the things that they're doing, and brainwashing and desensitizing.
Yeah, exactly. Because right now, if we're having this discussion, I can guarantee you that very few white people, they might listen to us, but they just don't understand how, like, what we like. It would like we're making wild claims, because they have been brainwashed. So the brainwashing started with them. So they also need some mental liberation. There are white people that are getting to learn of what's really happening, and they're fighting a good war, because at the end of the day, this white, I've just used the term white generally, but this power structure that's happening is, it's all a group of certain power hungry individuals. You would see them there at the World Economic Forum, and then all these other institutions. It's a circle for them, and they're all about maintaining their own power and control over the world. That's why they do not mind at any stage, if it's necessary for their struggle to kill 1,000 white people. They'll do that to achieve their own means to an end. So the white people also need to be liberated, because it's a human war that's happening, and we're not making wild claims when we highlight these things. It just so happens that we as black people and we as Africans, we have suffered the most from all these acts of colonialism and imperialism, more than white people. You must look recently, there was the issue of the monkeypox. The way that it was being presented, you would see the media that they put black faces in front of, as image covers to all their reporting, which creates the impression now to the average European who's never been to Africa, who just relies on CNN and Sky News and so forth. It creates an impression that Africa is a diseased continent, and then it creates stigmatization. That's why to this day, there's lots of white people that just view Africa as just a continent that's full of animals and HIV and diseases and so forth.
It's funny. It's funny you say that. In the tweet which Malick had up, which got a lot of attention, I start going back and forth with a gentleman, and he basically said that, well, Europeans didn't go into Africa And I'm like, well, how do you think they colonized the whole thing if they didn't go in there? And he was saying, oh, well, they couldn't go in there because it was so diseased.
Exactly. So that's the brainwashing that's happening, and it's all in the media. The way that it presents Africa. We are this country that our continent that constantly requires aid, right? And I've never seen an economy or people that have developed and progressed based on handouts and aid. You look at Nigeria, they've got oil, but they importing petroleum. In Africa, Nigeria gets more funding from the British government, and the other one is the USA Aid Organization. That's what Nigeria is surviving on, over and above the IMF loans and so forth. And it's the case with all the other African countries. And the other challenge that we have is the immediate challenge as African people is the people that we have in positions of power, the colonial administrators, like I would like to call them, because they are the enemies of progress, because they're working with this system of subjugation, of pushing us to the peripherals of poverty. And we need to tackle those people. We need to confront those people and whatever.
They need to have that fear of their
Yes.
population more than the colonizers who are putting them into power.
Yes, that's what needs to happen. So yeah, like I say, that's a very powerful question. There's many ways of tackling this, but the basics of it. And I think one point that we touched a lot on during the course of our conversation is the element of unity between African people and all other exploited peoples, because it's the same struggle that we need to unite, and we need not fight in different segments. This is the war that we must take right straight to the imperialists and fight as a unit, because that's exactly what the imperialist is doing. So we need to unite. We need to forget about all these boundaries that the colonizers have set for us, to say this is Nigeria, it ends here. This is Ethiopia, I'm going to cut it, ends here. Because, that's not us. We did not do that. End of day, we want people, and we need to unite and understand that we've got a common enemy, and our common enemy is this system that favors the white population. It's an imperial system. It's a capitalist system, because what also this propaganda media like CNN and them have done is they have convinced almost the whole world in most countries that communism is a bad thing. So today, if I recommend to anyone that we need to fight this as a community, there's lots of people that, like, no, I'm doing fine in my life. I don't need to be fighting these wars. I've got a good job, it's paying me. I've got mortgage. I've got a nice car and so forth, because you're not thinking in communal terms. The reasoning for that is because we've been taught that capitalism is the way to go. Communism is very bad. Look at Cuba, look at and all Venezuela and so forth. But you're not being told that Cuba suffered it's suffering from economic problems because of sanctions from the West, right? It's the same thing with Venezuela. It's suffering from sanctions from the West, and that's used to justify the notion that communism is bad for human civilization. I just cannot understand why working together as a community towards one goal is bad for the human race. So what, at the end of the day, what it becomes is capitalism is a system for the white power structure, whereby it capitalizes, on our ignorance. That's what it is.
Yep.
And we must liberate ourselves from that ignorance. We just cannot continue to rely on these mainstream media channels that push one agenda, and that's the agenda of the white power structure that will keep us exploited for as long as we allow it. Remember, it's up to us to stop this. These guys will never at any day go back to Berlin conference and sit and say, guys, let us devise an exit strategy. We've done enough damage to Africa. Let's desist and move away and let these people govern themselves. They will never do that. So
Yeah.
the ball is in our court. insofar as stopping this rot is concerned, we must stop them, because they're definitely not going to stop. The war is definitely even more difficult for us now, because amongst us, Black people and Africans, there are people that are willing to serve the European masters, which gives us a very big challenge. But I mean, we've got the population on the ground. We need to educate more people. We need to show lots, highlight to many people what's really happening in this world, and kind of like start to pull people away from mainstream media, which is basically propaganda. And then from there, because once we get the ideology right and you get lots of people sharing the similar ideology, then you begin to win the war. And also, we must challenge the education system. It needs to be decolonized, because it doesn't help now. The kids, when they go to school, the kind of history that they're being taught at school, it's European history, which presents the likes of Bismarck and Hitler and Winston Churchill as these great men. And when you get to the African history element, it's almost like we're being poked. We're being presented as these inadequate people. So again, it's mental colonization, because at the end of the day, the war that we were trying, or we're wanting, or that we're needing to start right now, eventually the race or the generation that must run to the victory lap is the generation that's coming after us. This is not going to be an event, it's a process. And we need to start preparing that next generation now. You catch them when they're still young, when they're still impressionable. Create programs for all these kids, or even in schools, or even if it's outside of school, because the schooling system, as it were, it's just an industrial complex, thing where of further colonization. So education does not start and end at the school, but it continues outside. So we need to start grooming all these future leaders so that the ideology is right. And up to, and because if we win the war ideologically, then it's easy for us to move to the next stage of seeing how do we then take the war straight to the enemy. How do we fight? How do we ensure beneficiation? How do we control our value chain? How do we control our supply chain? How do we start manufacturing our own weapons if we must? Because, like I said, right now the war is on an ideological turf. But if the enemy loses that war on an ideological level, then their next resort is what? Is the barrel of the gun. They're going to do that, and we must be able to defend ourselves by all means, at all costs, because they will not hesitate to wipe us out. They've done it before, they can do it again.
Well, and I'll hop in and say this. I'll read Hamza's Hamza's comments here. It's gave me a couple of tips. So gracious of I thank you. He says they will kill blacks first because they know they are the originals. Let's see, what was the next one there? Collins family in the west and the Farnese in the east both want to destroy us, and I would go destroy the African race. I would go into more families than that, but yes, that is a good part of it. Yaya Paul Vaccini, controlling all the religions on this planet, which I got to look more into that. I know you probably sent me something, and I need to get into my Instagram and double check. But yeah, I'll definitely look into that, Hamza. I agree with the statement to a degree. All religions all religions are used to control people's mind. Yes, they are, even though that is not what they are. And I don't believe. Well, I don't. I'll just leave it at that. I'll just leave the comment there for a while, because I am a person of faith, so I do believe that it is important. Wesley says, "Thank you, everyone on the panel." Freethinker says, "This was a great episode. Thank you, Marcus. Chris, wonderful guests, and the chatters. I have YouTube chat and Rockfin open. And Emma, I want to bring up her. Wait a minute. Let me see that one. It says, if we're going to be masters of our destiny, we must be the masters of the ideas that influence that destiny." Dr. Henrik Clark, one of my favorites. If you guys are not familiar with Dr. Henrik Clark, please go back and look into his work. And I would actually throw in Dr. I throw in Khalid Muhammad also as somebody who, a lot of his lectures and stuff have gotten me a lot of information. Um, yeah, Emma says, not true. Religions came from people. It's part of our culture. I agree. When religion gets captured by an oppressive state, that's the asterisk that you have to put next to that. It can be used by the state to justify its oppression. It's a very good reason why the Catholic Church did not allow people to actually read. It's a reason why they said it all in Latin, whether you understood Latin or not. It's the reason why Latin is a dead language. They didn't want people to understand what they were actually even saying. It's the reason why it was illegal for you to have a Bible in Europe outside of the church. It's also a reason why slaves were not allowed to have the Bible and know what it's actually saying. It's also part of why they took pages out of the Bible. It's also part of why, if you look at a King James 1611 Bible and you look at that versus any other King James that came after it, or most of the Bibles that came after it, it's a reason why 14 books are literally missing from it. There are reasons for these things that they do. And like I say all the time, Christianity as a whole, the worldwide, major Christianity is plantation Christianity. It's no difference from what it was on a plantation to what it is now. The same way that they teach a doctrine. Yeah, you might have more pages and you might have more chapters to read in there, but do you actually ever even read them? Because you got to remember, the Catholic Church and these organizations decide what the doctrine is. That's the reason why they say a whole lot of crap that doesn't make any sense, or say, well, this is prophetic language, and so you got to understand. No, it's propaganda. It's the same propaganda which we get in the school systems and all that. And so it's important that you fight this war upstairs first and foremost. If you can, that's the reason why that old saying, knowledge is power. Ideas are power. And so all of those things have to be shared in. Now, I will answer Baba's question. It says, how do we navigate this morbid, archaic savagery from the ruling class? How do we push them out? How do we tear them down? What's the answer to get your power back? Well, for me, I do not hide the ball that I am a person of faith. First and foremost, I decide how I'm going to cover stories by faith, by my faith and by my understanding of prophecy and things like that. I decide my values on what I believe, how I should treat people, whether it's my family, my loved ones, my friends, even my enemies. It's all dictated on my faith and my belief. I don't expect everybody to have the same faith and belief that I have. Therefore, I'm going to give you guys two answers. I'm going to give a more secular answer, and I'm going to give my faith-based answer. When it comes to my faith, I believe, in all honesty, that what we are seeing are being cleared up, and these wars are being fought in a spiritual realm. And I don't mean spiritual as like, oh, well, this is happening over there, but I mean things are happening in the earth and in the world, which line up with prophecies, which I see, that I visually see them happening. When you guys just see a mass shooting over there, and you guys just see an earthquake over there, it has a sense of chaos, and it doesn't fit together, and it doesn't fit with anything. For me, I don't see it the same way. I'll just leave it at that. But to answer this in a secular term, because I know a lot of people who listen to my content are not faith-based people. The number one way and the most powerful weapon we have is our brains. If we are able to perceive the threat, then we can deal with the threat. And so, for instance, if you don't know that you have cancer, how can you stop the cancer? If the consciousness of this nation can't understand what's being done to it, and by who's doing what, and how are these things being manifest, you could never fight against it. I've done research into, when we start talking about, the elites, so-called elites, or the cult. You got to remember that a lot of this stuff are plans by very, 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 very wealthy individuals who have put these plans out, not a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan or a 20-year plan. These are sometimes 100-year plans, which families are working towards to accomplish. Last night, I threw out about Reynolds, about how the Reynolds family owns majority of the tobacco that's produced throughout America, that they have a big stake in the marijuana market, that they also own a lot of aluminum. And I'm talking about the Reynolds wrap, aluminum foil and all that. But it's not only that. Most of the compressed aluminum that goes into your car, aluminum that goes into your phones, aluminum that goes into your laptops, and all of these different things are by one family. The weapons which were produced in this country up until a certain time came from the DuPont family. One family supplied all of the U.S. and a lot of their allies weapons. They mixed themselves into DuPont, Dow Chemicals, as you guys hear, the Dow Jones. Hello, there's a correlation there. A lot of these political families, the Rockefellers, at one time controlled majority of the educational system that we're in. So we have one family dictating what is fact, what is fiction, what is reality. Most of these theological schools are controlled by handfuls of people. Going all the way back, and you start tracing these, and a lot of people will look at different systems. And I used to, because when I was in college, I majored in history, I minored in political science. And so I looked at the minutia and the ins and outs of these different political constructs. And you know what I started to realize? No matter if you were in ancient feudalism, if you're in communism, if you're in socialism, if you're in a regulated form of capitalism or laissez-faire capitalism, completely unregulated, the number one overarching thing is that there was always a group. I call them a cult. David likes to call them a cult, so I think that's a good term. And the reason why I call them a cult is, even if you don't believe in any kind of faith or religion or theology, they do. And therefore, this is how they operate in the world. This is how they do things in the world. And if you can't see that or understand that lens, it's kind of like if you live in my house and I have certain rules, but you don't care to understand what motivates me to have these rules, you won't understand what I'm doing to you. In order to understand what they're trying to do to you, you have to understand their thinking. I mean, Sun Tzu, Art of War, know thy enemy. And many, because religion or faith matters nothing to them, they never take the time to understand the thinking and motivation of the enemy that they're facing. Thus why when the United States and the Western powers went into, the Middle East and all that, and were fighting against, different versions of Islam, they didn't understand. A Sunni believes one thing, a Shiite believes one thing, a Baptist believes one thing. These are different concepts and different understandings. And if you can't have enough respect to understand why a person is driven, then you're not going to understand how to deal with them or stop them when they start initiating these plans. And so I say the first part, it has to be a mass awakening. Once you can isolate, and the thing about it is sunlight on these issues, when you start pointing these people out, and they can no longer hide behind the curtain, just like the great and powerful Oz did. He's only able to be powerful because everybody feared what was behind the curtain and never realized it was just a little tiny insecure man who was controlling everything. And it's the same thing with the power structure we have. It's just a small group of families with an immense amount of wealth. And what they've done is they've diversified themselves into so many corporations to disguise the fact that, no, they own this and they own that. And when you think well, I'm not going to buy from this company, I'm going to buy from that one to stick to them. They still own that one also. But if you're not paying attention to how they diversify these things, how they control these things, you won't see what they're actually doing. So in short, that's how we navigate this archaic savagery. We got to shine a light on it. We got to know what they're doing. How do we push them out? I believe because of their own ignorance and their own pride, they are starting to do it themselves. If you look back to the three Roman empires which have failed, you look back to the French Empire, you look back to the Spanish, the Portuguese. How did all these nations fail? Overextending themselves. As they overextended themselves, they got themselves into trouble, and they made themselves weak and vulnerable for rising nations to be able, who were more hungry, to be able to strike the blow when they were weak. How do we tear them down? Tearing them down, honestly, it's one of those things that we have to almost step back from them. We can't be immersed in their systems and give their systems legitimacy. That's part of it. So the answer, in a nutshell, I say, to getting power back is by having knowledge and understanding of what's actually going on. That's how we fight back against what's going on. Because a whole lot of people are just thinking, well, we just get rid of capitalism. That's not that's not going to work, because these same people sat behind the lines, literally funding the royal families. These same people funded into the early Lenin, the Lenin movements, Marxism. I'm trying to think of what it was in China. A lot of Maoists. They've been the brains and money behind this. Look into the East Asia banking. That goes back to the Li family. The Li family literally goes all the way back to the Tang dynasty. All of this, if we don't know who the enemy is, you can't fight the enemy, in a nutshell. So let's see some of these comments. Stop the World Economic Forum global protests. We can no longer allow the World Economic Forum at all to control global governments. Yes, they are controlling global governments. And when people are thinking, well, no, it's my secular system that's in here. And so if we match more to what this country is doing or that country, i.e. becoming more left-wing, or some people believe more right-wing, that's not the problem. The problem always goes back to the money. If you follow the money, you will figure out who is doing what. So yeah, sorry I went on a little bit of a rant there.
Just to add on to that, or from that comment about the World Economic Forum, and I want to link it back to what you just mentioned, that we one important aspect is that we must understand these people, how they diversify their network, and how they operate. Let's look at the World Economic Forum. It's presented as this organization where global leaders with good intentions go and meet and decide how the world can be made a better place for us all, right? That's what most people believe about the World Economic Forum, until you dig in, you realize that it's not about us, it's about them. But then the guy who formed the World Economic Forum, that Klaus Schwab man, he is linked to a company. I think we will touch more on it on our next conversation. He's linked to a company which was supplying apartheid South Africa, with resources to create nuclear weapons in South Africa that were meant to decimate Black people. So up to until we try to figure out and understand the person behind this organization historically, that's why history is very important. Understand the links that this person has had, how he's been working previously. Then you understand that there's absolutely no way that this man can have good intentions about the future of the world. they're pushing this new world order
Well,
and new.
well, Google Lathu, did you see? Did you know about what I did last night when I was talking about 6G and we were talking about Web3?
No, I didn't get it. I didn't get it.
I'll send it over to you. And
Okay.
I guess I'll tell you which mark to go ahead to start in because I think we went about 3 hours last night. But the check into the 6.3, and I mean I said 6.3, the 6G. That's very important in this. And for those who don't, who haven't been abreast of what's going on, there is still an Illuminati. Let's get that on the table and on the record. And they still are controlling things. I mean, if you already know that people have massive amounts of wealth, that doesn't just go away. In fact, it's almost impossible to go away if you understand how banking works and percentages. The more money you have in there, the more money is accruing constantly. If you guys need a reminder, you guys remember the old movie Brewster's Millions? Remember how no matter he kept trying to get rid of all the money. The goal was him to blow like this portion of money. And if he could blow that portion of money, then he was going to get the mass inheritance. And his lawyers would keep putting money a certain way, putting money that way, and it kept making him more money. And so we got to understand that when you get to the level where you literally own a whole nation's monetary, a whole nation's debt, do you understand how much money that is, how that accrues, how that appreciates over time, how much power that gives you? A lot of people focus on, and I'm not saying we shouldn't, focus on the Bill Gates, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I'm not saying we shouldn't focus on the Jeff Bezos, the Elon Musk. But we got to remember, there is somebody that is pulling their strings. There is somebody who they're saying, yes, master, to. And if we don't keep that in the forefront of our mind, that there is somebody who is driving an agenda that they are putting into place, we won't get what's actually going on. But yeah, that we have a lot more that we're going to pick up on the next one, and I guess I'll break a little bit of news here. Me and Google Lathu are going to be working together more and more, so we're going to figure out the ins and outs on how that's going to work. More than likely, it'll be probably on these Sunday conversations, and we'll just kind of get together, put our brains together, and work on this. I know I'll have to hop off here definitely soon anyway, get something to eat, rest a little bit because I was up super late. If you guys can see all the bags, and then I got my class to go back into. I don't know, see how tired I am or not, if I'm gonna do it tonight or Monday night for Hebrew apologetics. But please definitely check that out. Go over to the Political Matrix, check that one out also, what we did last night, and the interview that we did with Glory. For those who are listening on Rockfin, I messed that up somehow, so I have to delete the double one that I did, and I am going to upload that interview with Glory on Glory Jones of Slow News Day, and of the Julian Assange case. So that's I will leave it there. Google Lathu, anything you'd like to leave the people with before we get out of here? And thank you for joining, Em. I'm so glad to see you in here, and all the other people who was my first time seeing you in here, first time running across this channel. Yeah. I appreciate you all, and to all my regulars who are in here, much love and thank you all for being here. But Google Lathu, what would you like to close on?
Thanks, man. Like you've mentioned, we're going to be doing this, working together more often. So there's always lots of items to unpack. And my request, will try to get as many people as we can involved, so that when people ask questions, we can highlight and give some more information and context and detail, and so that, because like we mentioned earlier, that we need to start at a mental level. We need to capacitate people, and we can only do that through information. So for us, this is a platform where we can teach people about what's happening in the world, highlight lots of issues that are happening in Africa and all over the world. There's lots happening that we're going to be covering, and I think today's conversation was great. With We had Malick that joined us, and also we had Alphabet. We touched on lots of different topics, and for us, this is our modus operandi. We're not going to limit ourselves to just one item. So,
Yeah.
and the audience, anyone who's watching, just feel free to ask any questions. If maybe, because the link is always available, if there's any questions that come for those who are going to watch the recorded session, you can post questions if you've got. Then maybe on our next session, we can, start maybe the first 30 minutes just answering the questions that would have come up.
Yeah, we might even just have some streams where we're just going to have questions. And then if it's something where you want to go more in detail, like he said, we can put the link out there, let you be able to come on for a minute, ask us some questions, post some questions to the chat. And so, we're definitely going to do a lot of that stuff. And so make sure to look out for that coming.
Yeah, I think also with topic suggestions, if there's the audience, there's certain topics that you'd love us to cover, just
message me or message Hughes.
Yeah, then we can cover lots of that information. But yeah, thanks a lot, man, for the platform. I think we had a very, very great conversation today. We covered lots of items. Like we mentioned, we could go on for another 3 hours. There's just
We'd have to stop because I know we would, but and I gotta get some food in my belly. So much love to everyone out there. So much love to everyone out there. Thank you guys, and we will catch you guys not that long from now. So make sure you guys are subscribed to this channel and at the Political Matrix on Rockfin. All right. Have a good one. You guys enjoy the rest of your day, evening, or night. Let's see. Can we discuss the nuclear Africa family one of these days? Yes. Please just remind us, and we will definitely bring that up.
Yeah, definitely. And also for Marcus has previously shared the articles that I write for Schoon TV.
Well, and I was going to say, make sure to send that to me, and I will start putting them on Rockfin. I'll start uploading the articles onto Rockfin too.
Awesome stuff. Yeah, then I'll share with you that information so that we reach a wide audience as much as we can. And if anyone has got questions coming from the articles, then we can unpack and cover them here on the show.
Yep. All right. You guys have a good one.